Good evening.
Hello, man. How's it going?
Not bad. And you?
Yeah, not bad. Have you been hitting your area with the storm and all that?
Yeah, we had like a fairly serious storm here last night. Like the wee small hours, we had like a red warning. So a lot of people didn't go to work today because it was like so bad. We had kind of storm. I don't know I forget the name.
The Owen.
What is it? Owen, is it?
Yeah, Owen or Eowen,
Owen, I
however
suppose.
they're
Yeah.
however they're pronouncing it.
But yeah. So basically, it kicked off and did some damage. But I think we're over it now. It's the second.
Hmm.
Like normally we get a series of winter storms here. We get three or four or five, six of them, depending. So this is probably the second big one that we've had. But yeah, I think we're out the far side of it now. So, but I noticed like this morning, all the windows were covered in a kind of a, I don't know what you call it, like a hazy residue. So I noticed on the window of my van and along the house, and
Hmm.
I thought okay, it's just because the high winds are blowing dirt off the ground or whatever, and it's getting hammered into the windows. When you wake up in the morning, you see this residue, but this residue
Hmm.
was like, I don't know. You get a bit paranoid, don't you, or a bit suspicious these days with seeding and whatnot, and all this talk of metals in the air being seeded in the air, aluminium, etc.,
Yeah.
etc. Maybe it's paranoia, but maybe I was looking at this dirt on the windscreen. I was going, geez, I'd love to get that tested. I wonder what's in it. Is it just regular mud or what? But yeah. So the whole place went into overdrive with the media and panic buying bread and you know,
We've had the same as well here.
yeah,
And moreover as well, supposedly around about the time of the 28th, they're predicting snowstorms, and we're going to get really bad snow blizzards, and we're not going to be able to leave our house for X amount of days or weeks. And, so everyone is now, like what you're saying, panic buying. Uh, Furthermore, as well, I found it very strange because, yesterday, it's the end of the
mm,
first semester of college. So basically,
yeah,
I just finished 3 or 4 assessments across the entirety of the week, and my sleep schedule was all to hell pretty much. So I came in yesterday. It was about 3 or 4 o'clock. This was after college, and I just went for a sleep, like a nap, and about it was almost drifting off. I don't know. It takes me quite a while to drift off. Maybe 30, 40 minutes. I was just lying there trying to drift off. And then what comes on the on my phone next to me? This leave the world behind sort of emergency siren, exactly like leave the world behind. And obviously, took me up. I got up. I'm saying, what the hell is? I thought somebody had hacked into my phone or something.
yeah.
And then I go on it, and it's this government government warning. Red alert. There could be rolling blackouts. Um, structural damage to peoples and property, risk to life, and expect you get torches and candles ready because expect the power to go out, and disruption to the telecommunication networks. And it was at that point I realized that they're using this, whether it be, of course, artificially induced vis-a-vis geoengineering or cloud seeding technology, or of course, what you're stating regarding the strontium, aluminum, whatever they're using to seed into the
Yeah.
atmosphere. to generate these very anomalous and extreme weather patterns all across the globe. Whether it's artificially induced or it's just simply a natural occurrence that they've managed to predict, they seem to be using it for perception management purposes. It's quite
Yeah.
clear. It's just so it's just so hysterical. I mean, the
Yeah.
whole that alert system using "Leave the World Behind." It's that siren on it. It's insane.
And
Totally
where did
insane.
that come from? Like, where did that thing on your phone come from? Was it like a thing from Google
Mhm.
warning you that the weather was bad or whatever, or what?
Well, I was still quite, I wasn't, because I was about to basically drift off. I was in between that state of consciousness and sleep, so I was pretty rough. And so I looked at, but obviously I use an Android, so on it, I think right at the bottom was something like requested by the Scottish government. So in
Okay.
essence, good, or was it the UK government? Forget now. I was quite tired at the time, but so it's almost like they're using Google, they're using Apple, obviously all of the operating system providers to pass this sort of a mass formation psychosis, or sorry, quote quote, severe weather warning and emergency alerts through the phones. I mean, it's strange why you would go to that extreme to provide essentially an emergency siren that is so. I mean, of course, you find it in pop culture, like what I just mentioned, but it also sounds uncannily like a nuclear bomb warning, like a ballistic missile warning, something like that, and it's something that's imminent, an imminent danger, rather than,
Mm.
well, don't get me wrong, it was pretty severe weather, but it wasn't anything to you know get hysterical about. It just it
Yeah.
just uh, it just impeded people from going to work essentially and from traveling. Uh, but apart from that, it wasn't really anything that dangerous. It wasn't a tornado, it wasn't a hurricane. But why go to those extremes? You know,
Mm. Well, I suppose it's against the backdrop as well of what's been happening in America recently, obviously with the California fires and a lot of discussions, and that in turn against the backdrop of the Hawaiian fires previously, and just a general sense of climate doom that's continually, it's like Goebbels said, if you tell a lie big enough and tell it often enough, it kind of morphs into a kind of a truth. So you've got this kind of weird, then you've got the social media thing. We have to remind ourselves that that's a new factor on the scene. Really, like people are tied in with social media and panic from the media, the mainstream media period, uh, and reliance on the algorithm, predictive modeling, for weather patterns, etc. All adds to a kind of heady brew of panic and kind of fear, I suppose. And what we saw anyway was that basically the country shut down here for good 24 hours, 12, 24 hours. Um, and a lot of panicked, like a lot of conversation along the lines of, well, if the country issues a red weather warning, your car insurance is not valid. This kind of thinking, like the people were coming out with. In other words, if you drive to work and like tree falls in your car, you're not covered. You're not insured. It's your fault. You shouldn't have been on the road because you knew there was a red warning. So it's kind of very strange.
it's the same with business liability as well. So there was a lot of businesses today who just went ahead. For example, my fiance works in a cafe, and one of the individuals who came into the cafe, he, is a very sort of stern and no nonsense type of business owner for a packing company. And
Mm,
he said, I told my drivers, if you don't come in, you're not getting paid. But the problem is as
yeah.
well, when you have high-sided vehicles and that goes down, you could, well, HSC will come after you. Because again, like what you're
Yeah.
saying, you had that red weather warning. You're going to get the fine off that. Then the liability insurance probably won't cover you for the damages with the truck or the car insurance, whatever it may be. And then you'll have the added liability, the added expense of covering the potential lawsuit that the employee will lodge against you. So
Mm.
yeah, it's almost like the government essentially just through this warning system, they have the power to shut down the entirety of the country. Through
Well, again,
essentially the
it's
back door.
decision. The decision making is informed by the algorithm, by the predictive modeling, by the algorithm, the system that models what's going to happen. And fair enough, last night we had a fairly, we had high winds or whatever, but like they used the same rationale for the 2020 influenza spread. They were relying, their decision making was based on that kind of predictive modeling. Here it is after 1 month, here it is after 3 months, here it is after 6 months, and it spits out a graph, and it panics the decision makers because they can't but act on that because that's the best available data for their kind of situational awareness. They sort of have to act. They're kind of, this hand is guided by the algorithm, but that in turn is subject to, it's like lies down damn lies and statistics. It's all about who programs it and how it's programmed and how it perceives threat, etc., etc. And actually, not to just to divert a little bit on the point, some of the stuff I've been trying to get a kind of an insight into recently is this warfare, this new warfare doctrine, which is a network centric warfare, which apparently is the doctrine which kind of underpins the American uh, strategic warfare doctrine at the moment. It's around networks essentially, and there's a number of angles on that. One of the networks, by the way, and when it's used the word network, there's a line of thinking that the network is you. Your, I suppose, biomagnetic, bioelectrical, and biomagnetic machinations that happen in your body, for example, your brain or your heart, are subject to manipulation from without. So some of this we've come across recently with a kind of Havana syndrome and such. But it seems that this is very much the area of interest for modern warfare, which is fairly if you take the conclusions from it, you might conclude from it that things like your weapon is meaningless now. Your rifle, etc. Your gun essentially is rendered obsolete if you can affect the minds or hearts literally of the enemy as such, and or your own people. But where was I going with that? Well, there's sort of a number of I don't have any comment on that, Silas.
Well, it's ultimately the perfection of war,
Yeah.
as because warfare itself isn't the reason you maximize uh, casualties, damage, and inflict that upon the enemy. And of course, in modern warfare, we've seen the local population and the citizenry who are obviously non-combatants. They've been brought into the fray as well, and the reason for that is is because you're attempting to destroy the will of the enemy. So, in essence, uh, perhaps, of course, now we have a um, more, we've highlighted it to a greater extent, but all warfare has always been network centric, meaning
Yeah.
it's about breaking down the society. It's about bending the opponent's will, destroying it, nullifying it, and in turn, like Vercingetorix, paying homage to Caesar, you will make your opponent bend the knee to you, and eventually you can culturally assimilate him into your own network, right? Which is what we saw with the Roman Empire. They had perfected that, perhaps not as perfect as what they're intending to do now. This really ties in with biodigital convergence. It permits them that level of um, control indefinitely. See, that was the problem with empires previously. You didn't have the predictability of indefinite control. But now with biodigital convergence, that is a very, I would say, likely. It's a likely possibility, or if not, in terms of the the advancement of the technology of biodigital convergence, it could necessarily become a done deal, right? That we become assimilated into this biodigital network. We become assimilated by essentially our secret opponents, those who in the shadows plot our destruction, but we are perhaps, and the majority of us are not aware of it.
Mm.
So yeah, that would be my comments upon that.
Well, like, does it beg the question: should we be investing in some sort of Faraday type clothing or shielding for our bodies or phones and stuff like that? Is that does that sound paranoid, or is that like a legitimate? I think that might, if that type of technology is available, should we be thinking about protecting ourselves? And
Well, please finish your point. Sorry.
no, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, it's this idea that perhaps the Faraday casing, right, be it an attire or whatever it may be that we wear, it would only again, because the way that they're implementing this and they're seeding this technology is through intravenous means. It's through the food supply. It's
Mm,
through, of course, even the haze and the fog, right?
yeah.
This type of smart dust, these
Mm,
nanoparticulates. All of that is being done in a very invasive way. Yet it's a way that's unbeknownst to the majority. It
mm,
flies under the radar, no pun intended, for the
mm-hmm,
vast majority of the citizenry. So again, if we are being biodigitally augmented, but not necessarily augmented to our own interests, augmented in the interests of this emerging world monarchy, this techno tyranny, then the Faraday attire that we wear would only stop the the information passing from our bodies to the regional or the regional grid node, right? Be it because obviously there will have to be towers, there will have to be a grid of some sort of a relay system to ensure um, the efficiency of the information, of the passage of information to and fro the various um, members of that network to the towers and then back to the centralized nexus point of the information, the central authority. So that it would only impede that. However, there is the idea that, well, we don't actually we're not fully cognizant uh, as of right now, the potential long-term implications of, of these technologies, of these nanoparticulates, of this smart dust, of this biodigital, of these technological mediums of biodigital convergence. So it won't insulate us from the potential health impacts, but yeah, it may insulate us from for us, uploading literally our information in a very obviously a way that is beyond our knowledge by these biodigital machines, if you will, um the sort of little the nanobots, if you will, and all of this. If this is even true, of course, it may just be perception management itself. But I mean, I have to be honest. I err on the side that they do have this technology. It's it's
Yeah,
just a given. It's so logical for power to go to this extent. To
yeah,
take this trajectory of travel, because power seeks predictability and it seeks to centralize all power unto itself indefinitely. The only way to do that is to control the members directly, but in a discrete manner, which of course this seems to cover, right? This checks that box.
yeah. Yeah, it seems that that this technology is here and they have it. From what I understand, so I don't know. It's worrying, I suppose. Like, because if they do have it, then it's as though the horse is bolted. Um, in terms, things are inevitably now going to change, and they're going to change at an exponential rate. Like, and I'm not sure what, if any, sort of uh, resistance could be offered to that change, because it'll be so overwhelming that come in like a tidal wave. It's already here, really. But I think it remains that maybe people who are trying to see through it or understand what's going on will kind of be able to keep their head a little bit more, or perhaps a lot more, than the masses, because I think the masses are going to be basically swept off their feet by this, seismic epochal change, the age of Aquarius, if you will, like this whole new deal, like for humanity, is just going to radically change everything. But it'll change it in a manner that the masses won't have any concept of that change in any sort of real time, or any tangible capacity to, like, they'll be offered narratives like a bone that's thrown to a dog. um, Here's a political hot potato, catch, that the dog will chew on it for a while to keep the dog kind of curious and occupied. For
Mhm.
example, AI was an example of such narrative, because it was sort of pushed out into the media. Well, what about the AI? The AI is coming down the line, and the AI could be dangerous, or the AI could be great. And you've got TV talk shows, daytime radio, where the AI, in inverted commas, is being thrown out as the kind of narrative de jour. The the say it like, this is what we need to be speaking about. But the wider context of that epochal change is never mentioned. But you'll be given these little lynch points, little nodes to discuss. You'll be allowed to discuss them. But the wider thing is I think it's lost on the populace, generally speaking. I think it's completely lost on them.
Oh, it's totally lost. It's
I
it's
mean,
lost
I'm
by
not saying
design
I'm
as well.
fucking, yeah, and very well designed. Like, it gets to a point where you end up empathizing a bit more with the fucking enemy, which is problematic, because I mean, it becomes tiresome to look at the people that surround you, the society that surrounds you, rather, and go, is there really no counter maneuver? Are you incapable of it? Do you not even see what's going on? I mean, do you not? Is there no political manifestation of a counterpunch? Is there no, like,
Well, the
there doesn't
problem
seem to
is.
be. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, sorry. Please finish your point.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, you can probably see where I'm going with the point. I mean, I don't need to labor it, and I don't mean to sound arrogant saying how, but it's more a kind of a dismay, I suppose, that I can't see that there's any, for example, from young people, from the youth, where you would hope that the society would have its most vibrant and sort of, it would have its life force would be in the youth, that they can't kind of, like, that the whole society's been depoliticized, it's been castrated, and it has no capacity, A, to understand where it is, B, to understand what it has been deprived of, and C, to understand what has been offered in place of that deprivation. And once that information, if it could be assimilated, to have any sort of a sense of enragement, or being enraged, or being robbed, or being belittled, or humiliated, or misled, or having been lied to or betrayed. No sensibility of any of these at all. Just blindly mumbling along like a cult member or something, so some kind of someone who's been lobotomized or hypnotized. So it's startling. So, you start with an initial dismay, and after a while, after that dismay calcifies and grows cold, you're kind of left going, well, maybe they fucking deserve it. Pardon my French. Because how can they, if they cannot see through this, they cannot sort of assert themselves in any way. And if the machinery is that successful and that powerful around the machinery of propaganda and social engineering and mind control and all the rest of it, if it's that powerful that they cannot resist it, well then, more power to the winner. Because I mean,
I mean, the problem is there was a game that was invented in 1986 by a Russian sociologist, and in essence, it was called it either goes by the name mafiosi or mafiosa or
mm,
werewolves,
yeah,
and essentially it's a game of social deduction where
yeah,
the majority are the villagers, and you'll have two werewolves or mafioso,
mm,
and as each night goes by, um, of course, all of the players sleep, bar, of course, the two unknown werewolves, right?
yeah,
So they kill off a villager per night, and then of course the game is the entire the villagers, the population of villagers must figure out before all but two of them die who the werewolf or mafioso is. 9 times out of 10. Now again, this was to prove a theory, a social deduction theory, and a theory of power by this
mm,
Russian sociologist, Davidov. I forget his first name. What it proved 9 times out of 10 is that the villagers the uninformed majority would never figure out who the informed minority were. Never,
yeah,
before they all died. It
yeah,
was so you're talking about there is a serious issue with power. And
yeah,
the issue is it seems to be cyclical. And
yeah,
and in a grander civilizational arc of development, the informed minority, which will only grow more and more brazen, the more power they accrue, the more bodies they amass, and of course, the more wealth they centralize, they will become more and more and more brazen to the point where, of course, they are sitting at the top of the pyramid of skulls that they have piled up from all of their competitors of the
Mm.
past, until all that's left is a desert and they rule over the ruins, right?
Mm.
That is, that's in essence the Great Reset, right? There's cautionary tales about this. You see it throughout mankind. The major ones, of course, that come to mind is Atlantis, the Tower of Babel, these sorts of notions. Another problem as well that we see, and it's even in conspiracy circles, and I've noticed this whenever you try to speak about these issues, um, you'll have this, and again, I think this is all by design. I don't know if you've read any of my discussions surrounding the terms, auto hoax, uh, fakeology, these sorts of terms, right? This idea, essentially, which it always culminates in this conclusion that everything that we see is fake until
Mm.
proven otherwise. And of course, you can't prove it otherwise because you've already made the assumption that everything's fake. So all evidence that you see that is contrary to that, you will take as a fluke, right? And you will just seek out as a type of confirmation bias how you can simply explain it away as fake. The problem with that as well is if the entire world is fake, you get a very solipsistic idea of everything. You take your foot off the gas. You,
Mm.
again, it's a sort of a um, anesthetic for the mind. It makes you
Yeah.
comfortably numb to everything.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And this, again, whenever we bring up these ideas, people say, well, this is fake.
Yeah.
Can you prove nanoparticulates? Can you
Mm.
prove this? Can you prove that? Well,
Mm.
carbon is a massive, hoax, or this is a hoax, or that's a hoax. You can't
Mm.
prove it.
Mm.
The thing is, no, we don't have electron microscopes, but you can prove it from its effects, the effects
Mm.
of the thing. We're already starting to see the effects of this technology come into to view.
Mm.
In terms of, for example, what we're seeing throughout the world, and the fog, the haze, this type of dust, and this, the dust storms in this country that they're putting down to, oh, it's just Saharan sand that's being
Mm.
drawn over by the jet streams by the wind. Um, of course, utterly ludicrous. And then if you state, well, we're seeing this throughout the world, perhaps it has something to do with smart dust that's been developed by DARPA and such.
Yeah.
Used in everything from digital terraforming to geoengineering. No,
Yeah.
no, it can't be. That's fake. That's to induce fear. You're fear mongering. You know. So you're basically left with a quote quote conspiracy culture that has been infiltrated, both directly and indirectly. Everyone's mind has been molded,
Yeah.
obviously unbeknownst to them, into this pattern of discernment where they discern everything as fake.
Yeah.
Thus, nothing holds any water. There's nothing that's serious about any of this. And they just simply turn into exactly what they believe they are in contrast to in the majority of the population. They turn into to
Mm.
sheep,
Yeah.
just
Yeah.
sheep that are on the fringe of the confines. But they're still
But
within the
that's a
confines.
master stroke. That is the master stroke of the propaganda.
Oh, totally.
That
Absolutely.
the complete and utter castration of the descent
Oh, yeah. And
into a kind of a void of inaction and delusion and just being lobotomized and willfully being in that state, just
but
lost.
this is the problem. They're so deluded that they don't believe that these principles, this idea, this meme really that runs through the entirety of the conspiracy culture, which is everything is fake. They don't actually realize they've been lobotomized. They actually believe that they are intellectually superior. There was
Yeah.
several memes that I saw recently from a flat Earth channel that stated, well, on the meme it stated it was three sharks, and each shark was getting bigger
Mm.
and eating the other shark, and the biggest shark it had the caption "Everything is fake," and then after that, conspiracy theorist, and that was being eaten by of course, the implication was the intellectually superior. Everything is fake.
Yeah.
And then the conspiracy
Yeah.
theorist was obviously eating the normie, right? The auto
Mm.
believer, or whatever term we're going to
Mm.
use here. So what it's done is it's used religious programming to, in essence, create an artificial division where, in fact, if you look deeply at it, there is none between the supposedly intellectually superior um, uh, auto hoaxers or conspiracy culture. And then
Yeah.
they've created that divide with the quote, quote, normies and those who
Yeah. Yeah.
don't believe everything is fake. So you've created essentially um, ideological fanaticism that placates or plays to people's need to feel intellectually superior, as though, because of course, if you're on the fringe of society, you want the benefit of feeling like, well, feeling vindicated. Well, yes, all of these stupid peons don't realize, but I realize,
I get it. Yeah.
So, yeah. So this is how they've developed this. Again, like what you're saying, it's a total masterstroke.
Well,
The
it's the
fact
same.
that
It's the
people are
same.
just so
It's
unaware.
the dialectical at work again. It's like, Soviet Russia. You had the ruling class, the landlords versus the worker. So the entire, 100 million people died on the basis of that idea. We need to, on revolution, or the dialectical of my sexual identity is, at odds with the mainstream sexual identity. So that's that dialectical, that crowbar, or, the dialectical of, a dangerous climactic situation, uh, interfering with the balance of nature, that dialectical. But coming back into what you're saying, it's, the informed, shrewd, intelligent, what do you call it, truth movement person, or whatever, versus the normie. There's that dialectical as well. So they've just played on people's arrogance to kind of, create an elitist us versus them kind of scenario with this so-called movement, or alternative way of thinking, or conspiracy, whatever way you want to call it, like, But it's very, very cleverly played, all the time. But it's very difficult. Like, I think, like, down the line, it's to come up with tactics. Literally, like, if one was to accept that we're at war, which I do, I believe that we are at war. Firmly believe that. Like, there is no other word for what's happening. We are at war. We're the subject. We're being warred upon, uh, in a new way, a new type of war. But unless and until we develop a kind of counter tactics, how to deal with this, we're screwed. But I think, as you said a long time ago, one of the most important things is for us to keep talking, keep speaking about it, keep trying to elucidate, or try and at least to find out where are we. Maybe not come up with the tactical wherewithal to move forward or around it, or the countermeasures, but to ascertain where are we right now. is like the first move, to get situational awareness of where is the average thinking man or
Mhm.
woman vis-a-vis this storm, this war that's happening. So who are we and where are we, for starters? So even to get to that point, because there's been a considerable objective and operation to destroy anyone's awareness of where that point is, to destroy your awareness of who you are and where you are vis-a-vis your world, your society, what immediately happens around you, and by default, a little bit of who you are in
Yes,
relation to that as well. So you've been
that's it.
subjected, and your society around you has been completely subjected to this massive bombardment. And like I said, the division, the dialectical has been played in there, but it's the deeper objective was to destroy meaning. Meaning, full stop, had to be destroyed.
Was this
So you know,
it's
the,
the post-truth society. You're
yeah,
living in a
yeah,
post-truth world where,
yeah,
again, or post-structuralist. There are no
yeah,
structures. This
yes,
is I've spoken about, and you see this with Trump. He's talking about the golden age, which obviously
yeah,
links to this idea of the golden age of Saturn or Kronos,
mm,
which also links with Yahweh and all. Essentially, it's very subtly speaking to this new age idea of the age of Aquarius. Aquarius, of
yes.
course, the
Can I pause
astrological.
you? Just pause you
Mhm.
very briefly there, Silas. I know you're kind of an expert in this area. Could you give us a quick backdrop on to this in inverted commas age of Aquarius? Where does this term come from? And like me, a working man, how can I get a working man's understanding of what this means? I know it pertains to water somewhat, and it's obviously Aquarius is like a kind of a star sign type thing, and it's a constellation. But where does the concept come from originally, moving into the age of Aquarius in inverted commas, and what, in basic terms, does it mean or does it entail?
These world ages, where we take the astrological signs, of which there are 12, and we
Hmm.
subdivide them down into various sections of time. Now we do this every year per months. Of course, you can do it in a grander manner due to the concentric nature of these cycles. So, in the grander manner, you have essentially, give or take a couple of hundred years either way, a 6,000 or 7 millennia um, year cycle that started in the age of Taurus and
Yeah.
will end in the age of Aquarius.
And
So
is this from the Hermetic tradition, or is it Greek, or from what tradition does this
there
concept come from?
it's perennial. So it exists in in essentially every mystery religion,
Okay, okay.
under different names and I guess you would say auspices, right? So, for
Okay, and
example,
so does it align then with constellation movements as such, given the fact that you say it's perennial, so that it was observable from all different civilizations, that there's this consensus that so they all, like, a given constellation
mhm,
is in a given position in the
yes,
heavens at
yes,
a given.
there's a celestial backing to it. It's the
Yeah.
retrograde motion of the processional year, which is
Okay.
25,920, which encompasses all 12 of these world age signs, as per the zodiac. So what I mean by it's retrograde is that we go clockwise instead of counterclockwise, which we do
Mm-hmm.
through the year. So in
Mm-hmm.
the processional year, that's um, the axial transition from Polaris being the North Pole, the pole star, to Vega being the pole star. So
Okay.
this creates a sort of a axial axial transition, which again, if you were to plot it on to illustrate it, that long term 25,920 year cycle, again, give or take a couple of hundred years either way, it creates that circle, and then
Okay. So
itself, of
on any
course, you have
given
smaller.
epoch, a given constellation will be the dominant one, and will give the name to
Exactly.
that age, to that
Yeah.
actual age. So hence the age of Aquarius is the dominant one in that precessional movement at this point in time. Is that correct to
Well,
say that, or we're moving into it?
we've still got 150 years or so. Of course, again, as I stated, give or take a couple of hundred years, given the
Yeah,
expanse of this long-term cycle.
yeah,
So what we see right now, everything is transitioning into that era. It was similar to the age of Pisces, 2000
yeah.
or so years ago, where you had the Roman Civil War leading up to the BC AD era, that transition, which essentially was the age of Pisces, the onset of it. You had
But
this similar turmoil.
sorry to cut across you, just to hone in a bit on this. These given ages, for example, between Pisces and Aquarius. So, for example, Aquarius, like they will be dominated by certain characteristics, which will give the zeitgeist of that age, and those characteristics will be inherent in the sign, so to speak. So, Aquarius, for example, being a water sign, will have that will have metaphor or reference or translate into the characteristics of that age. So each sign has a given set of characteristics. Am I right in saying that that will in turn permeate the characteristics of the age itself when it manifests? Am I right in saying that?
Yes, but there are overlaps between. So when the Piscean age technically ends, you won't get rid of the Piscean characteristics entirely.
Mm,
And of course, some of them are present in the other age or the other sign as well. So
mm,
one example is within the Piscean age, you had this great deal of compassion and empathy. Um, you also had religiosity. You had also art and creativity,
mm,
but you also most acutely had idealism and
mm,
these visions of utopia,
mm, mm.
which really you could say has paved the way for the Aquarian age and its
Mm.
onset. So this idea of the water bearer or the water pourer, as is Aquarius, this is an age of man. This is
Mm.
where man asserts himself in a very divine sense, or what he would construe as divine, right? So
Mm.
it's a very Promethean age because
Mm.
man seeks to emerge almost, to self apotheosize, to become a god
Yeah.
through his own technology, through um, the elucidation provided by his tools.
Mm.
So, in this sense, what you see with the water bearer is the informational age. The water
Mm.
is the information. The vessel which carries it is man. Man
Mm.
pours out his information into the abyss, into the digital unconscious, like what we were
Yes.
speaking about previously, into the shadows of himself, which is a shadow of God. He creates AI, AGI.
Yeah.
He pours all of his life essence into that, all of his
Mm.
knowledge, all of his information into that. So it's the same idea that, for example, Yuval Noah Harari talks about, where um, the greatest sin of this new system, or this new religion rather, of dataism, is to impede the free flow of information,
Yeah.
is to dam the information, and to of course, without the against the interests of the central authority as well. We must mention that. But it's this idea of water. It's all surrounded with water. The current of information, the flow of information, um,
Yes.
the to and fro of the information. And
Yes. The
it's
title. Yeah.
exactly.
Yeah.
Um, and it's even tied in with, for example, these lords of the earth characters, these demiurges. So you see Enki. Look at the illustration of Enki all the way back to the first lord of the earth. Enki literally means Lord of the Earth. En Lord Ki Earth. And he's linked with both the earth and water because both of them in the mystery religions are feminine principles. First came the first He, which was water, and then the second He was earth, and the Yod He Vav He. So you have this notion of the feedback of water, of the oscillations of the cycles, of the peaks and the troughs. Again, this all ties into perception management as well. We can't, we'd be remiss if we didn't mention that. And furthermore as well, within the age of Aquarius, the entire world will become topsy-turvy, which is what we're graduating to in a very, I mean, we're graduating to it, but we're doing it in a very accelerated fashion. So what I mean by that is the um the everything that we have taken is a natural constant in the world will be
Mm,
turned up on its head in the age of Aquarius. So, for
mm.
example, this idea of distinctive gender binaries and gender roles
Yeah,
will not exist,
yeah,
or something else will take its place.
yeah.
Um,
And
you,
why will it have that characteristic, as you say, that things that had their essential meaning will now have be without that type of meaning? Will it be done for a strategic reason to
yes.
break apart the consciousness, or is that?
Well, again, the mechanisms for this, man's psyche seems to be cosmopsychic. By that, I mean, for some reason, man seems to elicit a certain uh, collection of behaviors within these various world ages for whatever reason. We can speculate about what mechanism, but it, yes, it does appear that the elite of the society itself, its very, very divine, energetic direction seems to be altered by the celestial movements. So, or the movements of the celestial bodies. Another thing to mention as well.
Can you just expand a tiny bit more on that point? You mentioned that the mindset, if I
Mm,
got you correctly on your point, of the ruling class was somehow uh, resonates or manipulated by the dominant, as you said, the Aquarius energy. That somehow they're influenced by that. Is that the point you just made?
there was a book that I read, and it stated that I think it was one of the Rothschilds that mentioned this, or it was one of the Rockefellers, and he stated that um, millionaires do not use astrology. That's only for the billionaires. So it's this idea that you see within, for example, Leave the World Behind,
Mm,
where the cycles of everything seem to be intertwined. And again, yes, this
mm,
goes back to the Hermetic principles, as above, so below. Or
yeah.
again, nothing is found within the effect unless it's also present in the cause. So if we understand that the first principle, the prima causa, is an immanent
Mm,
force that exists within everything,
mm,
and everything echoes it in some way,
yeah.
then by that understanding, what we see within the heavens, though of course we may be literally um, like pareidolia or apophinia, finding patterns where there are none, or perhaps we are literally projecting our psyche, projecting our archetypes, projecting our energies, our psychology on to the furthest away object that we can find, which of course are the celestial heavens, and because it allows us to more accurately introspect or to cogitate upon who we are
Mm,
through that projection. So what what um what I think occurs at the sort of higher levels of the elite is that they do map out everything. Every cycle is accounted for. Every potential natural cycle that they cannot control, they may be able to steer it ever so slightly, but they won't be able to control its direction or trajectory distinctly. What they attempt to do is preempt it. So by that, for example, within the Aquarian Age, the reason for this complete and utter inversion of everything is
Mm,
because those of the haves will become those of the have-nots, right? Which it's
mm,
prophesized to be essentially across every culture at the end of the fourth age. So the fourth age from Taurus, which is
mm.
Aquarius, there will be a sort of a culmination of destruction. It will be an age of destruction. Um, I think they're all honestly preempting this. This is why, for example, you're seeing within the
Yeah,
conspiracy culture, they're literally promoting. They're promoting this consolidation or this protection of their power because they know this inversion of the entire world is coming. So the way that they do that is they literally invent the uncertainty. They invent the lack of confidence in the government.
yeah,
And from this, it allows them to steer the fear, the chaos,
yeah, yeah.
into a more amicable area where they can provide a solution or a final solution, or they can come from the shadows and provide that solution to it. Um,
And
another,
as you say, sorry to cut across you, it's a preemptive. It's a very occult, like a ritualistic, energetic, MO, because you sort of preempt or you act in a preemptive way to draw sort of reality, the happening of reality into your favor. So you act preemptively to create the kind of nodes that eventually reality will weave its way around and become the real. So you set it up, so to speak, in that sort of energetic, active sorcery, really. If that makes sense, I think that's what I'm taking from what you're saying there, which is very
yes,
interesting because they're
exactly.
looking down the line, say, right, this is where the energy is going to be in this era at this time on these dates. So what we'll do is we'll set up A, B, C. We'll make event X happen. We'll have these three characters on the play, and all of that, all of those machinations of the play will be a creative, energetic impetus to resonate with the subsequent happening of the real, and which will then will become reality. So it's a literal act of magic, of sorcery, of conjuring, like in a literal sense, like. And I think language actually is very important in that. The use of language and imagery, signs and symbols rule the world. It's like you said very interestingly there, the Age of Aquarius, this concept of water and the flowing of data from man is like the flowing is that this water symbol, this data and information is that there's waters. But as well, if you look into water, the division the division between things in the watery world is blurred, all as one sort of thing, because it's all smudged and blurred, and it's aquatically merges into a unified whole. So it's like this post-structural, post-modern kind of mindset ties in with this
Hmm.
aquiline sensibility of blurring, that being blurred, like images that we see underwater kind of are blurred.
Yeah,
They don't, the
it's
hard
it's
edge
the
is gone
abyss.
from things.
Yeah, yeah. It
Sorry,
also
what?
ties in with this idea of Mercury. So
Yeah.
Mercury itself, in its conception, by the alchemists, the Renaissance alchemists, and of course the Kabbalists, the two are interchangeable. That Mercury was this substance this universal substance, which was the primal state of all matter. So everything was merely um, a variance of Mercury in that sense. It was a variance of the transformation, the the material chaos or the primeval chaos of matter. Um,
Mm.
I wrote down a list. This was something I covered in Yahweh's Satan and also Leave the World Behind, an esoteric
Mm.
analysis. Pardon me. And I stated this that in the age of Saturn, a subversive, self defeating, and a thwart loyalty to ideas of equality and utopianism, or the idea. This is how the age will be characterized. And utopianism, or the idea that man may solve all of the issues of civilization by the false assumption that his reasoning is infallible and that the maintaining of power for all time is within his reach. Re-establishment of slavery, which you're seeing through mass migration and other euphemistic terms as well, beginning in an indirect manner through voluntary wage slavery and the lowering of the living standard by a combination of inflation driven upsurges in the cost of living and the oversaturation of the labour market by immigrants who are willing to work for below the minimum living wage of the native, and of course, as well, the intentional dumbing down of all populations equally, leading to natives being priced out of the market from the bottom classes up. Total inversion of social roles, the drastic alteration of the ethnic landscape of the world, and the reversal of traditional hierarchy throughout both the world and society. Perpetual prescribed and controlled revolutions and conflicts, which is exactly what we see now.
Yeah.
For example, we brought up this notion of the conspiracy culture versus the normie
Yeah.
culture.
Mm.
Everything is now a dialectic. Everything.
Yes.
Everything is a conflict. It all has to be. You can't simply be neutral and um, step forth from that neutral position and merely look at both sides. In that sense, one example of this is someone called me a shill and a realologist, and
Mm.
quote, I'm paraphrasing here, but it went something like, "Why am I fraternizing with the likes of these auto hoaxers and fakeologists and these people who say that nukes are fake when I don't necessarily ardently come out and state that, right? I don't emphatically proclaim that from the rooftops." And again, it just shows this notion that all of this is built upon religious and dialectical principles to create division amongst segments of
Mm.
society, to tranche society up so it can be more easily administered by a
Mm.
centralized elite who are not tranched up, who are not divided. And furthermore, as well, within the conspiracy culture, this is something you see with the Cronia and Saturnalia festival. It is by the central government it was a prescribed festival, meaning it was constrained and prescribed by a formalized determinus of time, right? A span of time, and of which behaviors were permitted. So it allowed total liberality, be it of whatever stripe or means, and it permitted as well an inversion of the social norms. So masters during Saturnalia would provide food and cook meals for their slaves who would dine at their place at the dining table of the household. So it was a total inversion of everything for the impossible equality. And the reason for that was the state saw the benefit of prescribing these, what were to the citizenry what they thought were, though it was false. They thought that they were subverting the system by engaging in this, but in fact, the system was using these subversive activities in a prescribed and formalized manner to literally permit the venting by the potential dissident population or
Right.
the resistors, um, to diminish them, to mitigate that segment, that energy, to basically get
Mm.
rid of the energy in a way that didn't harm the system. So you see that through negative feedback loops. The negative part of the feedback loop is essentially diminishing or negating any potential disruption or perturbation that could occur within the refresh rate of that cycle of the loop. It's the same thing within the Aquarian age. You're going to
Mm.
you're going to find this, and this is why you see the conspiracy culture, who believe everything's fake, and they believe they're empowered and emancipated by such a belief. Of course, they're actually entirely debilitated, hamstrung, and paralyzed by such a belief. It allows the uncertainty, the fear, the disruption, and rejection of one's eyes and ears, and it substitutes it for this belief, this assumption that everything is fake. And of course, then you get to the point, well, the majority of the population have never been fully equipped or inclined to engage in deep cognitive, um, critical, and complex reasoning, right? Because people don't have enough time, of course, to do this. So they rely
Yeah.
upon thought leaders, upon intercessors. Now, these intercessors, these thought leaders can be controlled by the system, either directly or indirectly through funding. And when the social credit system comes in, they can also be controlled through that way as well. And again, the system can prescribe these subversive activities. It can prescribe the dissident thought and behavior in a way that benefits the long-term survival of the system. And just to continue as well, the discontinuation of all boundaries and categorizations, and most importantly, a strident and unstoppable march to automation and artificial intelligence. This will be in tandem with a probable pharmacological and militaristic liquidation, or a harvest of souls, if we were to be dramatic, of the newly
Mm.
defined useless classes, which is something you're beginning to see become popularized amongst the elite. This will be done through a series of contrived global conflicts, global hysterias, and that realize global inoculation targets, and through excess death by simple increases in poverty contrived in fiat linked austerity and planned logistical breakdowns. Another thing to mention as well is this misanthropic idea of the useless class. Do you know what's hilarious about this and ironic about the conspiracy culture that's
Mm.
been, um, you could say, infiltrated? It's been uh, upended by the system in very subtle ways, right?
Mm.
Is that Yuval Noah Harari and the World Economic Forum and the rest of the elite are misanthropes, meaning they have this idea of what are we going to do with these useless classes, or who
Mm.
cares about the useless classes? But then you see the shadow at the bottom, the reflection of them, the camera obscura of that in the conspiracy culture, and they call them
Mm.
normies. Look at the entire, and of course, even
Yeah.
myself, I was guilty of this.
Yeah.
But upon retrospection, it was completely absurd of me to do this and think like this, think in this way. But it was designed for me to do that.
Yeah.
All of this conspiracy culture, this idea that, well, what were they calling them? The tainted, right? The ones who went and got the needlecraft. Well, they
Yeah.
deserve it. They deserve it. They're useless anyway. Or yeah, I think they were called were the tainted ones, the tainted, yeah, the tainted, those with tainted blood,
Well, it brings you back
something
to
like
the
that. Yeah,
point, the power of the word, the power of the label. You label me, I label you. You know what I mean? And once you have that label, you're on one side of a fault line, and you have an enemy, you have an other to push against. Be that a scientific other, a climate change other, a gender other, or a political other, like the normie versus the enlightened, conspiracy theorists, or whatever way you want to put it. But it all works. There's a hinge in the human mind. There's a hinge, and that hinge swings over a fault line, And it's a very kind of primordial force inside us that, that's kind of how we tick about things, and I think the system knows that, like, and it plays on it. It plays on it to with immense success,
It,
because it fools with us.
well, it's magic. It's
Yeah.
it's a magic word. It's the abracadabra as opposed to the avracadabra, and this is what creates um, the hexagram, right? The upside down triangle, the limiting force of the upward triangle, which is the force that provides
Mm,
the force of generation. So in the middle is where power resides. It creates um, that six-sided box, right? It
mm,
creates the fortification of power and the fortitude of it.
mm,
So it's all of these things are magic spells. You will always have these words of power where one essentially derides his enemy through these dehumanizing terms, these dehumanizing brandings, this ad hominem attack, these ad hominem attacks, and then you have the other side where they will compliment their fellow zealots, their fellow fanatics. So all of it is words of power, and what is it designed to do? Well, like the hexagram, it's designed to keep you in the box, to create the central node of the six-sided hexagram, which is the box, on its side.
mm,
That's
mm.
exactly what it's designed to do. Again, the force of limitation, the force of generation, or the force that seeks to complement and to maintain the rigid structure of the in-group preference, and then that weaponization of the in-group preference through attacking the other, through othering
Yeah.
those who are not in the in-group.
Mm.
It's all magic. It's magic, but people don't really. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the human population are they are
Well, if I can just
yeah
preempt the point you're literally just
yeah
about to make, and in a magical fashion, invert it and say that, well, if they could see it, it wouldn't be magic. That is the nature of magic, that it is unseen.
yeah
If you know what I mean, just to flip it in a, if I trying to preempt it, that they may. By preempt your point, I kind of understand that you were going to go in the direction of that they can't see it, you know. But
yeah
that is the
they're
nature of magic, is that it can't be seen as such. Like, it's a sleight of hand as such.
yeah sleight of hand, sleight of mind. It's because of the suggestibility of this all, and of course all psyops have a certain in their pre-planning stage, they have a certain target audience analysis that they undergo. So they study the target's values, their beliefs, their vulnerabilities, what they
Yeah,
desire from
and their
or what
reactions.
their reactions exactly, their pattern of reactions, and what they would
Yeah.
desire from the psyop, from
Mm.
the psychological bait, and then of course they put that into operation. They disseminate it through the mediums of the thought leaders, and they market it. I mean, for example, in the conspiracy culture, it's been a very gradual thing. So you started off with, for example, Alex Jones, who's
Yeah.
the sort of OG of this all, right?
Our
And
best friend.
yeah, our best friend. So he's the sort of bombastic archetype. But then you had other archetypes that again may have not been directly controlled. They might have been indirectly controlled through whatever ruses or means that
Yeah.
basically steered them in this direction of becoming
Mm.
part of the or at the helm of the
Yeah.
nascent conspiracy culture at the birth
Yeah.
of the internet. William Cooper, for example,
Mm.
and of course he came out of the military, but there was something
Yes.
that steered him in that direction. I forget what it is now, but so he saw the corruption. Perhaps he was meant to be exposed to that corruption because they were steering him like almost like the Bureau of Psychological Change. They were steering him in that direction. Um, and you have to wonder, how did they become so viral? And what
Well,
is
this
up with the pipeline between prison and the military system and the conspiracy culture and conspiracy thought leaders? There's a strange pipeline there, you know?
well, it's one to be very wary of the word, the use of the word or the term or the label, because it's like, that term conspiracy culture or truth movement. Like I purposely, definitely, and defiantly do not identify with those terms, and I'm deeply suspicious of those terms. And as far as I'm concerned, they are counterintelligence language developed inside the cauldron of the marketing department of black ops and psychological warfare. They create those terms to bind. They're literally spells, literal spells to bind consciousness into a bottle and to say, well, by osmosis, you people will begin to identify, well, I'm part of the conspiracy culture, or I'm not an army. I'm one of the,
Or the truth
truthers.
community. Yeah.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
truth community. I belong to a community. It's like, nationalist insurrection in Ireland became aligned with certain paramilitary and political movements because that's the way it was. So you may have started off with a political instinct, and suddenly, slowly, or perhaps joltingly, you became aligned with that movement. But that's a vehicle that's being created for your brain, for your sense of self, and for your energy. So that's why I think people have to be very, very careful with language and terms. And even like one of the great ones that doesn't seem to ever get mentioned much is this naming of generations. So somewhere in a marketing
Hmm.
department, a team of people sits around a boardroom table and says, "Well, what will we call this generation? Let's call it Generation X." Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's Generation X. And what's the generation after? Well, they've got a different name, and so on and so forth. So who has the moral authority, or who has the social insight, or who are these people who think that they represent our societies, and how audacious are they and arrogant to think that they can create this term, that they're pointing a finger at us and expect us to align with this use of language, which to me is insulting in the extreme. And like that's why I take major issue with the arrogance of this, the boot boys, the marketing departments of this power structure, this disgusting use of language, manipulative use of language and terms, and manipulation of identities, manipulations of the fault lines in society to create dialectical narratives and spark one against the other, and at the same time as offering us, in inverted commas, ideals, and you know at the same time as offering us these ideals, they'd crush and destroy
Hmm.
everything that ever had any meaning. So and display and show themselves in public to be absolute and complete hypocrites.
Well, it's the same idea as even like what we're talking about with the astronomical cycles, the age of Aquarius, right? So you can see the cycle, but then when you begin to see the mystery religions ascribe certain archetypal characteristics or whatever it may be upon that, then it's like the, there was a term that I heard of the IPS server, and it was quite an interesting term. This idea of the hyperstition. So it's when it's like a cultural framing. And
Mm.
this really links with ritualism and theurgy, magic, and
Mm.
magic being a sleight of hand or a sleight of mind, a
Mm.
tool of perception management or an outgrowth
Mm.
of it. And the hyperstition is essentially the self-fulfilling prophecy. So all of these dialectics that they're establishing in society, the
Yeah.
tranching up of society, is so that they can more easily input into these various divided and segmented sections of society, be it whatever it may be. These really what are theurgical terms, right? Magical terms such as Generation Alpha, Generation Z, the Age of Aquarius, all of
Mm.
this. And it was an ancient, I think he was if I recall correctly, he was an ancient Greek philosopher and historian, record keeper, Iamblichus. And he believed that one of the crucial reasons for ritual and theurgy and its accompanying symbols was to establish internal and external to oneself repositories for the containing of energia or divine energy. It may
Mm.
also be described that the energia or divine energy is also married to the nature of the human psyche, an indistinguishable element of it, for the cosmic and transcendent energia, divine energy, can only find manifestation and existence through the condensing of the psyche, and this is why all that exists will continually seek lower and lower vibrational states. What he's meaning by that is that, um, for example, let's apply this to political systems of power. The theurgy that they put in place, like what we've been talking about, all of this, Generation Alpha, Generation Z, by
Mm.
using these words, you're constraining and containing this energia, this
Mm.
divine energy, into these
Vessels.
vessels. Yes, these newly
Mm.
defined camps, dialectical camps, and
Mm.
by that you condense the psyche of the members in
Yes.
those,
Yes.
because
Yes. Yes.
for them to have membership in these camps, they must have their psyche condensed
Yes.
into whatever doctrine, dogma, or manner
Yes.
of way of speaking, configuration of speaking that is prescribed to them by the thought leaders.
Yes.
So this is why he's saying you get lower and lower vibrational states until you get to the total great reset. Again, looking at it in terms of astronomy or astrotheology, that would begin with Taurus and end with Aquarius. That's why in Aquarius, you would see things like the complete and utter upending of all tradition. I mean,
Mm.
the complete and utter shaking up of the jar of ants. The
Mhm.
geopolitical stage would be inverted or upended as well. All of that is tied into this. It's tied into this notion that we brought with the auto hoax thing, right?
Mm.
Or the fakeologist thing, or whatever. This idea that everything's fake, and what it really is that when people go into these lower and lower vibrational states, they have less self-reflection as an inherent virtue of their
Yeah.
character. So they become less and less even aware of their
Mm.
descent into these lower vibrational states, if you will. Um,
But
it
I
becomes a
do
vicious
think,
cycle.
yeah, and back to this idea around the spell and the use of language, like through the process, there's a slow migration of actual meaning of the word, that it moves from its true position, which we call A, and the objective is to move it from A to B, which is a position, an understanding of that word that is more beneficial to the power structure, shall we say. So you're slowly migrating meaning itself into into position B, which, you know, things like everything is fake. I mean, that's a new type of meaning. It's like a new type of meaning in consciousness that's been kind of reformed through the use of language, because like language is the primal method of understanding. So I think like it has been used in the way that you might change the tint in a pair of sunglasses to completely recolor the world. And so it's seen in a completely new way because through that language is how you understand. So as they've
Yeah,
migrated the meaning, they've completely changed
yeah.
the way
It
people can understand things.
totally contorts everything, and it creates, like what we were saying with the hexagram, it creates in the middle the synthesis out of that dialectic of both, the dehumanization of one's opposition and the prescribed use of language within the organization, within uh, the dialectical camp. It establishes the box. It
Yeah.
establishes the
Yeah,
box, the
exactly. Yeah.
six-sided box, and you know, you see that everywhere throughout the mystery religions. For example, the mythology of Cyrus being tricked into the box and segmented or dismembered and decapitated by Set and then chucked into the box and set upon the Nile. Same
Mm.
idea as the slumbering and the slumbering and autonomous dreamer of Orion being set upon the Eridanus. I believe it was in a box as well, right? So
Mm.
again, it's this within the mystery religions and the schools of thought there is essentially built into the fabric of it the tools and the keys necessary to unlock the doors of perception of not just man himself, but of uh, the literal, the literal collective. So mass perception, the doors of mass perception, the keys are there to unlock that, and you could establish any religion you really wanted to just from studying the various archetypes that appear, for example, in the tarot deck or
Yeah.
within the Splendor Solace, or take any mythology of the dying and resurrecting savior, and you'll see the same tropes there that you could
Yeah.
actually, like what I've just mentioned there, you could reverse engineer them for psychological operations against people to facilitate the creation of these artificial, let's call them what they are, substitute cultures, these subcultures um, for the means of controlling people en masse, controlling both sides of the struggle.
Mm.
Um, but unfortunately, like what we're saying, it, a lot of this takes a great deal of self reflection. I mean, I myself, you, Medi, who's just joined us, you have to go through that self reflection. You have to realize, well, perhaps the whole, like these circles that we frequent, perhaps they're not all they're cracked up to be. Perhaps there's more to
Mm.
all of this than we're seeing. Perhaps
Mm.
it's not as black and white as they are evil and we are completely good. So everyone
Yeah.
that's in this camp believe them, and everyone that's in that camp do not believe them. So this type of simplistic thinking is what, well, firstly it generates simpletons, which can, simpletons are rather dangerous, right? And then secondly,
Mm.
it generates um, a deep-seated resentment for anything that perhaps is even remotely concluded as established knowledge, established laws, anything really that's realistically observable. So you really disrupt the thinking of people, um,
Mm.
and that's what every dialectic seeks to do, to disrupt the
Mm.
thinking of people. It's like we were saying, you view everything through a lens. All
Mm.
of the energy of mankind, the potential of people, the entelechy, meaning the fulfillment or the formalization, uh, the manifestation of that potential. You control it, so you turn them into almost like an automaton, in many ways an ideological automaton. And we've spoke about this before. This is the sort of snare of ideology itself, you know.
But what remain? It maybe it remains then that the most revolutionary act and the greatest act of countermeasures in all of this is to understand what's happening, to literally understand it, and to literally have the critical faculty, as you've as you've displayed there in your as you've been talking, as you've been speaking rather, that an ability to understand it, dissect it, analyze it, see the mechanisms of it, the effects of it, the propulsive energy of it, the raison d'etre, the modus operandi, all of it, to sit back and piece it together is probably is the best play to sort of take it apart, because I mean it's ultimately what they're doing to us is it taking apart, fracturing of the vessels. So for us to in turn fracture their vessel, and it's, I kind of feel almost like we're art critics, or jazz critics, or some sort of strange expressionist painting critics. So we're sitting back and we're watching all this like it's some great orchestrated maneuver, and and we're just taking it apart, and we're by doing so we render it sort of meaningless, or we render it into its actual state rather than its projected state, because it's projected itself as a monolith, but its actual state is, the man behind the curtain in the Wizard of Oz. It's really not that big. You can see the bits and pieces and how it's twisting and turning and why it's twisting and turning as it is. So perhaps for us to understand is our war, is our weapon, our greatest weapon, perhaps.
It's to become the hermit. The hermit that you see in the Rider-Waite tarot deck. You climb the mountain, meaning you reach that understanding of what is going on, right? But you don't remain in the sort of worldly maelstrom. You don't pick a side, because picking, and it's not even that you just remain totally neutral and don't pick a side. You have to again climb that mountain to get the vantage point, and then you have to look down below in a very, not cynical, but a very neutral and
But
balanced manner.
Mhm.
Yeah, but skeptical, yeah. You have to suspend your judgment of what is going on down below, and to just look at it, understand it, parse it through that archetype of the hermit. I mean, that is the only way, really. You have to become a philosopher, essentially, in that sense. You're not going to, you'll never change it by either revolution or deposing the system, because what will take its place is just another iteration of it. And the Lord of the Earth, Saturn, Aquarius, who is under that sign is under traditionally the planetary genus of Saturn. He will not allow time to end. He's the great timekeeper, the keeper of the thresholds. For you, again, it's in the name, revolution. The revolution itself is merely, it's still within the timekeeping of Saturn. It's still within time. It's within the maelstrom of civilization, of the cycles. The only way to break forth from it is for you to literally break away from it, to see it from the greater vantage point with that vertical advantage, and see what it is, what's going on below, who's fighting who, right? And again, it's to understand that on the ground level, perception is always skewed. So, for example, if you look at two shadows that are in front of you side by side, let's think of it like the columns of Boaz and Yakin, right? The Masonic pillars. And the sun, the eye of providence that is behind it, shining onto it and casting a shadow. If you're on the bottom, pardon me, not on the bottom, but you're viewing it from the ground level rather. When you view that, those shadows will be almost creating from your perspective of the ground level, they'll be creating uh, a non-parallel, almost triangulating pattern of shadows. Meaning it'll, if you draw your line up, draw your perception up, draw your eyes up, you'll establish that the lines will meet at the apex of the vanishing point of that eye of providence where the light has came from. But if you get if you have verticality, if you see those shadows from a vantage point that's from anywhere up above the ground level, and you look down at these shadows, you'll see that they're actually parallel, right? So it's that same idea, using that as an analogy. What something appears to be at the bottom of all things, at the bottom of the rung of the ladder, at the ground level, is not how it actually is from the heavens. It's that understanding. If you're just going to find yourself getting towed with all of these things that are rather dubious, the dialectics of it all, and fling yourself into the fray, you're not going to understand what the hell's going on. It's like a general. A general only understands the battle if he stays out of the battle and he sits atop the hill and looks down below at what's going on. You're not going to find a strategist in the middle of the the melee, because you have no idea what the hell's going on in the middle of the melee.
Yeah.
So
exactly,
it's that idea, eh?
And then to go back to your shadow metaphor, I just real quick, it's kind of similar to the idea of looking at an optical illusion and recognizing it's an optical illusion, even though it is 100% real as far as your perception goes. Not falling ploy to thinking this is real on its own merit outside of your own perception, and taking that into it is more.
So, Silas, if I may, a quick kind of a stupid question, right? For the average person, I mean, Saturn comes up again and again and again and again in discussions around the occult and the mystery schools, etc., etc. Could you just give a quick kind of working man's understanding of why Saturn is so important and what it constitutes in terms of the concept and how it plays into through trying to understand these kinds of topics?
Well, it's essentially the Lord of the Rings. By that, what I mean is, if you look at the classical understanding of astronomy, Saturn is the seventh planet, the essentially the last planet, before the pleroma, the fullness of everything which comes beyond from it, or heaven as we would know it. So it's the final planetary genus within the collection of planetary genii. And Saturn, in that sense, is similar to, it is the patient one. It is he who, again, if you were to watch a clock ticking round, he is at the point of that, the point of all points, if you will. He is the one who draws it round. He is the patient one. So, in that sense, for many, most notably both Aztec or Nahuatl and Mayans, and also Egyptian, and you could say Semitic and Mesopotamian peoples, it was always seen as either synonymous with the sun or as the black sun, the black star. To the Sumerians, it was known as the Mulgay, which literally means the great one, or, of course, the black star. It is he who sits above everyone. He is the psychopomp, the ferryman, the lord of the thresholds, the janitor, where, of course, or the Janus rather, where we get our term janitor from, meaning a doorkeeper or gatekeeper. So in that sense, Aquarius is the gateway age to the new reset, because all of these world ages occur, these grander epochs occur within four major ages of about 6 to 7,000 years. This is similar to what you see with the even grander Kali Yuga cycle in Hinduism, of which there are four. So, pardon me, the Yuga cycle, which there are four. Kali, the Kali Yuga, or the Age of Darkness, is the final one before I believe it's called the Satya Yuga, begins it all again, the Age of Dawn. So, again, preceding the Age of Darkness will always be the Age of Fire, and then vice versa. What goes up must come down. What is in the bottom of the trough, the only way it can go is upwards, right? So it's that same notion. It's the oscillations of time. That's what Saturn is. It's why he is essentially worshipped as the god of this world. Whenever anyone throughout all of the major religions, bar a few, bow before the Lord in heaven, what they're essentially bowing to is Saturn. It's Saturn. It's the god of this world. You read the Bible, it's this mercurial entity that is, he's a jealous entity. He's an entity who demands hierarchy. He demands to be venerated, revered, respected. He wants to be the principle of kingship within the universe, even though perhaps he may not be. He's the craftsman as well. He's the deity who provides both abundance and deprivation. So again, it's this mercurial, capricious nature you see. And again, that's similar to time, right? Time. And it's, for example, let's take the day and night cycle and the solar movement of the sun or of the black sun of Saturn. You will see that from the dawn, the sun rises, it is awoken, or it has resurrected from the underworld where it was in slumber. Then it will hit its zenith. Everything's great to that point. Then it will head down to its fall. Again, this is seen as well within the seasonal cycle of the year. And then from the fall, from the setting of the sun, the twilight of the sun in this world, it will go journey into the underworld like Orpheus or Tammuz or all of these Mithras. I mean, there's literally hundreds of them, right? Christ is another sort of figure, this death and resurrection deity. And then it will go into the zenith of its descent, which is winter, and then it will come back around once again. And you see this crop up with the terminology that's used constantly by, for example, let's take the American presidents. Biden was talking about, the dark winter, right? This constant reiteration of the dark winter. And now you have Trump talking about the golden age. The golden age is coming. I mean, these terms, of course, I'm not saying that the political puppets understand these terms in their deeper esoteric sense, but those who are writing the scripts for them, who are literally like political ventriloquists, putting the words into the mouths of these political marionettes, they must be fully cognizant of this type of language, because it's a language which evokes symbolism, it evokes mythology, it evokes deep-seated sort of psychological, perhaps subconscious psychological archetypes in people. This idea of the fall. You have in Christian theology and Abrahamic theology the idea of the fall from Eden, the fall from grace, the lost grace. Gnosticism, you have the idea of the sin of Sophia, and that we are in spiritual captivity, that idea. You also have within the Greco-Roman world and their mythology, you had the Golden Age. So we've went from the Golden Age to the Silver Age to the Bronze Age, and then all the way to the Iron Age that we're in right now. Again, this sort of Kali Yuga, this age of darkness, this age of ignorance. So it's these sorts of things that you see constantly crop up, and that's what really defines Saturn as a deity. It's a sort of capricious gatekeeper of Eden, a capricious gatekeeper of perhaps the full potential of humanity. It seeks to control and curtail us and to tailor um, our experiences, our perception, you know?
But Saturn as well kind of always had a kind of a quite a dark connotation. Am I right in saying that? Like a kind of a almost
Oh,
malevolent.
oh yeah, because it's capricious. But it's evil itself. Again, like what Terry Pratchett said, evil um, really begins. The origins of it begin with seeing people as things. So another thing with Saturn and the clock and all of this, it's a god of the measurement. It's a god, and because obviously the material world is measurable, then
Yeah,
this is Saturn's playground. And you see it within scientific reductionism, right? The attempt to quantify the unquantifiable, it's the Faustian drive. The massification of postmodern society, where people have been turned into literal economic units. They call them social capital, they call them human capital, human resources.
yeah,
It's evil. It's a system built upon Saturnian principles, which are, yeah, like what you're saying, it's evil. Don't get me wrong, though, Saturn can be good, but he can also be bad.
mm,
But the problem is, the evil stems from him seeing people as things that can be manipulated. Again, manipulated via, for example, mercy or judgment.
yeah. But
So,
there's a kind of a subtext to that. Like it's you know at some point, like the masses, as it were, or people, or oneself. If you are being manipulated, or you put yourself in a position where you're subject to manipulation, like that doesn't, you may be a victim, but you may not be completely a victim. There's some sort of tacit interplay in your own enslavement or your own victimization that you have engaged in, perhaps by some sort of a willful ignorance or some sort of a kind of a psychological dependency or need for validation or otherwise. So, like, what I'm kind of trying to get at is this concept of a completely naive, victimized masses may not necessarily be the case, that, part of survival and the Nakesh, the explosion of, creation that made us, but also that is imbued in us by way of the vibration of our life, our spirit principle of selfhood and the art of living, is rests on this capacity to survive. So we should, I think, be able to see through the lie. And if we're not, we must sort of self-reflect and say, well, have I, at some point in time, sort of entered into some sort of a contract with this deception? And have I signed on the line? Am I part of the problem, so to speak? So there's
It's a
questions
good
there as well that
question.
have to be kind of asked, because I know, and I sense from talking to yourself over time, Silas, and I'm definitely of this sensibility myself, that there's a certain, I would call it a political position almost, that's the product of a kind of an intergenerational sense of right versus wrong vis-a-vis the power structure or the political system. And it's us trying to help or assist what we perceive to be the masses or the people who are being hard done by or the people who are being kicked to the curb, etc., etc. But the point I'm trying to drive at is there a dynamic there that some of these people have? There's an interplay there that they've somehow are part of the problem in a sense by virtue of a kind of a willful ignorance or a self-destructive mechanism perhaps or some sort of a self-blinding. So so some of it is something they've been subjected to, fair enough, but I think there's definitely a part where that they have people engage with this kind of thing in the same way that one engages with a demon, for example, in an addiction scenario. One is not completely a victim if one is in an addiction type scenario or a demonic possession type scenario. One has at some point in time entered into discourse and has walked into the halls of mirrors and has willfully engaged in this kind of self-deception. So, but I
Well, that's
think
the
it ties
algorithm.
in with
The possession is the algorithm,
yeah.
And sorry, finish your point, man.
Oh no, but it's basically to say that I think I'm trying, and it's a sensitive point, but like I'm trying to kind of drive at the thing. Have people walked into this kind of thing? The position we're in now, have they sort of walked into it willingly or unwillingly to a point, rather than being a kind of helpless victim who got waylaid, but have they actively participated in it? Is a
Well,
serious question, I think.
well, they've participated in it in the sense that they have again they have unidentified biases. They have unidentified needs. They have unidentified psychological hinges,
Yeah,
and those psychological hinges have been identified by
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 the
the
captor.
yes,
Mm,
and those have been manipulated. They've been with the fulcrum of the dialectic of the ideology of the ideal that again
yeah,
placates and appeals to them, that has been used to wedge this hinge and to manipulate it.
but if
Um,
they're guilty of something in that scenario, then they're guilty of a lack of self-awareness. They have
yes,
not known themselves,
Mhm.
to use the Greek kind
a
of.
lack of self knowledge. They don't. To know thyself is the beginning of all knowledge. And the only way to do that is to literally introspect and to
Mhm.
contemplate upon who you are as a person. What weaknesses do you have? Where are the chinks in my armor, be it psychologically or even physically, right, or whatever it may be. Um,
Can
if
I
you
let me ask you a question, real quick one, right? Say you were, you spoke before of that Saturnine essence and the character of that Saturnine spirit or essence and how it might play out and its kind of mercurial, kind of schizophrenic capacity. If you were to sort of creatively sort of how do I say this? Give us an idea really about in this journey to understand oneself, one's inner self, to know oneself. What kind of interplay might that Saturnine energy have on that journey, on that path of trying to know oneself?
well that
If you were
that
to
is
characterize it, how would you
that
characterize the
well
Saturnine energy?
think of it as Anubis, right? It is he who weighs one's heart against the feather of Maat, of truth. So in that sense, it's about getting rid of, you could think of it in the dharmic sense of getting rid of the three poisons, right? I mean, the primary one's ignorance. I think they're really all, in my personal opinion, they all orbit this idea of ignorance. And what ignorance is um, the lack of like what you just stated, the lack of self-awareness, the lack of awareness of the environment, and one's contextual place within that environment. So Saturn is the shadow of oneself. It's the shadow of the bestial aspects of oneself, of uh, the lack of acknowledgement of both one's weaknesses and the overestimation of one's strengths. It is the pride that oneself feels, and the projection of the shadow of that. So, for example, one feels that they are a saint, that they are good, so therefore they are above evil. So even when they commit evil, they believe that it's good. This sort of idea. Again, this ties totally in with this notion of the dialectic of ideology, right? If you have an ideal of something, that is a shadow. It's a source of a shadow. Because again, all light is the source of all shadows. The ideal, the light, the Lucifer, right? The bearer of that light, the Promethean flame, if you will. It is that one thing that illuminates and is the source, the key for you to explicate all of the world, to understand all of the world by. The lens that you don't even realize is distorting your perception of the world itself. It's in that distortion of perception where the shadows lie. It's where Saturn is, right? You have to overcome Saturn to thus climb, figuratively, metaphorically, in an analogous way, to climb that mountain where the hermit sits upon and looks down below at the rest of the world, right? To gain that vertical advantage, that vantage point from whence you can see everything and and to understand the world from that greater perceptional state. Really, it's about self-discovery, self-knowledge. By that, what I mean is you understand the misgivings of your own nature, the unfounded aspects of your beliefs. You face it, you overcome it, but you don't overcome it in a way, for example, what we see within, again, just to use that term again, because it's just for ease of description, the truther community or the conspiracy culture. What you see there are these essentially false paradigms that allow the pride that they perhaps feel as, let's say, intellectual superiors or whatever it may be that they feel, to establish itself, to justify its own existence. This is done through, for example, everything is fake, which establishes this very warm and comfortable and benumbing position, which is solipsistic, which basically states, well, I'm the only thing I can know to understand. All else doesn't exist, so I don't have to worry about it, right? Which establishes the shadow or the malefic aspect of, well, who really cares how I treat people or the legacy that I leave or the actions that I bring to bear in the world, because all of this is fake anyway,
Exactly.
you know? So
Why does
it's
anything I do matter?
exactly. So it's about understanding the potential shadows of everything that one perhaps believes, because we all have beliefs, even myself, right? We're not going to get away. Our mind within the material world is destined to believe certain things, to have assumptions, but it's about understanding
Mhm.
the assumptions that you hold, how it may be affecting and providing a distortive aperture to your perception. So once you understand that, you bypass or you transcend that gatekeeper that is Saturn, the gatekeeper of perception, of potential. So that's how, for example, Jung would talk about Saturn It's how it's really. I would agree with Jung in a sense. That's how it's spoken of within the mystery schools. It's just it's dressed up in the fanciful metaphor and all of that. But that's essentially what it is. That's what Saturn is. It's the devil. It's the lord of this earth, the lord of the world. You know, the great tempter.
I was just looking into this to Jung's work with Saturn. It's really interesting. They called it an astrological meditation, or the full title rather, Saturn and CG, Jung's Liber Primus and Astrological Meditation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's also discussed as Zervan within his book Aeon. In fact, on this discussion of the Age of Aquarius and that his book Aeon, uh, though it's quite obscure, it's rarely spoken of. That is of extreme importance in terms of discussing the archetypes from a psychological and I
You might
guess you would say
post a link
mystical.
to that if you can find one,
Yeah,
Silas, to that book.
it's a really fascinating book,
What's it called?
and it's just called Aeon
And what's the
by
authors?
Carol Jung.
Oh, by Carl Jung. Okay, okay. And does he go into like, does he speak
Yeah,
about Saturn?
he discusses. He discusses this idea of time
Mm.
that's wrapped up in Saturn, and he goes into the age of Aquarius. Um, yes, it's really quite interesting. It's very out of all of Jung's works, that's probably the darkest one that I've read because the implications of it are so profound and they're so the way he writes about it as well. It becomes self-evident. Um, of course, he uses quite a lot of metaphor and other
Are you suspicious
mystical
of
language.
Jung at all, given his connections to orthodox psychology and academia, and the big names of that lent to the modern understanding of the human mind? What is your
Yeah,
like? Are you
Freud and
suspicious?
such.
Yeah.
Freud actually sort of disowned Jung as his
Mm.
prodigy,
Mhm.
if I stand
Yeah.
correct, and that was after he. Well, I mean, cut a long story short, he basically said Freud was a deeply disturbed individual and his theories were just completely incorrect, which they are. Just
Mm.
it's so evident that that's the case, and he looked at it from a more, you could say, I wouldn't say archaic, but it relies upon the ancient understanding and of myths and the ancient wisdom of myths and alchemy and all of that to really begin to piece together what was being spoken of within metaphor and sort
So
of
he would have
reflect
done his homework
aspects
on
of it.
all like the mystery schools and ancient
Oh yeah,
mythology
oh
and,
yeah.
and symbolism, and he would have used an awful lot of that understanding to weave his tapestry of understanding of the human mind. Is that correct?
His understanding of semiotics, which is the study of symbolism,
Mhm.
is, in my opinion, is second to none. It is. Again, when you begin to look at these symbols and then you look at what Jung has written about them, it becomes self-evident. And by that, I don't mean you're looking at Jung's understanding as, well, for example, let's take the Splendor Solace and the way Jung and his sort of Jungian psychologists would talk about that, um, and begin to decipher the symbolism present there. It's not necessarily that it's influencing one's own natural understanding of what they would see there, or at least in my opinion. I mean, I naturally just picked up upon the sort of breakdown of the symbols that Jung is providing, or the Jungian psychologist would provide in regards to, for example, the Splendor Solace, right? Um, and the alchemical plates there, of which there are 22 of them, sort of primitive tarot deck.
Yeah.
But Jung takes those things and he expands upon them. He ties in all of the mythological framework as well that would support that that natural interpretation of the symbol, whatever symbol it may be, present within the Splendor Solace, for example. So it's that sort of there's a mystical approach to Jung's work, but it's also very scholarly because he's touching upon basically all of these perennial truths present cross culturally within a slew of mystery traditions, an innumerable amount, and he ties them all in, and he really just shows, again from a very archetypal psychological point of view, what these symbols mean, what for example in Aeon, what this phenomenology of both the self and the age of Aquarius and all of that means.
But in at its heart, this type of piecing together of understanding is in essence very creative, very artistic. There's an artistic mechanism under it because you're looking at all these symbols and colors and patterns and planets and different mystery schools and you're piecing them together in a tapestry of understanding. So in doing so, it's a very artistic slash creative impetus, or it's as if art is sort of at the center of what's being done, and it ties in what we were saying earlier on. I think a little bit that there's a kind of an anti-art inherent in what we're seeing around us vis-a-vis the power structures trying to move this age into the age of Aquarius with all their attendant postmodern and post-structural breaking apart and shattering of the vessels and all that. So this the creative act, how one sees things and the use of words and the art in the sense it seems to be that mechanism is always in and around these types of discussions that we have and how things are understood, that it's there's an interactive interpretation, and in that interpretation there's a kind of a creative act or a creative mechanism, the result of which is that something comes to be, or it is understood to be, and then it is. So it's as if there's a playing of God. Like, I mean, I suppose you could argue that any artist that painted a picture or a musician who wrote a piece of music is at that point a kind of a resonant type of a fractal of God, if you will, or there's some aspect of the divine about that creative process. So it's creation and creativity and art, and it can be used in either way, to destroy or to create or to make or to put together. Like if you're talking about Jung in the way that you are, he's putting together, he's trying to understand, he's trying to elucidate, he's trying to know himself and know consciousness and psychology and how the mind works and the human soul, perhaps how that works and how it works with metaphor and sign and symbol. And so ultimately it's a creative act that he's engaged in, and it's a kind of an artistic act in that he's using component pieces and assigning them values and order to achieve an objective. Whereas the other anti-art, that's probably more the Saturnine art, is a taking apart, a breaking apart, a smashing, that's designed not to bring the viewer to some higher enlightenment, but as you said, to stupefy them or to break them down or perhaps destroy them altogether. But I just think it's fascinating that artistic impulse is in the middle of all this, and I think it ties in a very deep level with the way technology is going. For example, mathematics. If you understand the math, you don't understand the math. There's that famous quote that in the deepest and most technically dense aspects of mathematics, there's this creative act which is a subjective act, and so the manufacturer of reality is a subjective. It depends on who that master is, who is the sorcerer at the coalface of that understanding, creates that reality, opens the wormhole, and the box, to use your image, Silas, the box, the cube, it beholds the cube for everyone else and presents it to them, because they've been at that chaotic coalface, that the chaos magic, where the thing has not yet appeared yet. It hasn't kind of come into its full state,
Yeah.
but it will do so through their viewing, through how they view it. So I just think that is, and it's essentially what we're doing right now. To understand what's happening, we're using that creative faculty, and perhaps even that artistic. There's an artistic sensibility to it, because we understand it in just such a way, using our creative faculties and kind of and assembling into a certain order, which is the artistic aspect of what we're doing. So we're assembling this understanding, these component parts of the world that we see around us, into a certain order, in the same way that the artist who made the tapestry or carved the piece out of stone, or made the stained glass window, is looking at it in different lights, is assembling,
Mm.
he's interpreting, he's drawing something out of. So in such a way. So I just think it's quite interesting.
Yeah, and I think you really.
Jump in, Medi. Jump in.
I was going to say, I think that you're really onto something there with whatever the actual energetic process is that's fueling creativity. I think that is likely what is attempting to be tapped into with the latest form of technology. The most, I guess, the most developed artificial intelligence will be tapping into that.
Mm.
I'm not sure how to define it much better than just, again, the energetic component of creativity, whatever
Yeah.
that element is.
Well, I think that's a very interesting point, because you see, if you give it to the machine to interpret, that the machine itself starts to engage in its own acts of pareidolia, of seeing forms, shapes in the clouds. So the machine then tells you, look, in that cloud I see a horse. And at some point in time, the rest of the society also sees a horse, because that's what the machine said. So it begins to lead the way in its own active machine creativity. But it assembles on the basis of zeros and ones, and on the basis of, like, the machine learning. Well, other shapes in the past have been, this shape looks like other shapes that I recognize as being the shape of horse. So I creatively now see horse, but it seems like an act of creation, but
Right.
it's not. It's a kind of a mimicking, or a kind of regurgitation.
Mm-hmm.
To say, does
But that
reality mimic art, or does art mimic reality? Which way does it go?
Well, this is another thing as well, that Saturn, or Kronos, was also known as Anglo-Metis. That was an appellation. He went by. Of course, that's where our term angular comes from. So this idea that you take the circle, which is the perfect shape, and you square the circle, right? Like what you're saying, Zeal, you're picking out forms where perhaps none exist from the wellspring of pure potentiality, right?
Yeah.
Which is symbolized as the circle, and you square that. And Anglo-Metis also means it means crooked, right? Or it can also mean in Greek, especially in ancient Greek, that appellation, it can mean he who plots, or he who deceives, or he who is crooked or corrupt. And again, I think it's sort of harkening back to what you were saying, and eloquently stating, and that is, well, like AI, and I'll just jump into how, in a minute, how this, even the term algorithm links with this notion. But it's this idea that he's attempting to provide order not by actually establishing order from its own premise, but using creativity, and creativity is tapping into the primordial chaos, then he's repressing, or like what we were stating with Iamblichus's statement regarding the, the need, or um, the teleology, the end state product that's produced from both ritualism and theurgy, and its related symbolism. It's this notion of the managing of perception, the altering of perception, to confine divine energy, or energia, as he called it, taking that and essentially attempting to confine it into these repressed and suppressed forms,
Yeah.
right? These artificial forms. Um, so by that, like what you're saying, you're creating shadows of shadows of shadows of shadows. This is where you get the concentric ring of the panopticon system of perceptual management. It's dialectics within dialectics within dialectics, societies that are just trancheed up into subcultures, sub-subcultures, sub-sub-subcultures, and so on and so forth, just to try to maintain the larger artificial repression of the primordial chaos, which is order, or what they define as order. This is where you get the idea of ordo ab chaos, or order out of chaos. It doesn't say chaos out of order, because what it's instantiating there, from a very profound point, is that everything in the world is chaos. Creativity is chaos. And this gets into the idea that Steiner brought up regarding Ahriman. And he stated that this was in 1919. Again, it was, I think it was The Spirit of Darkness, those series of lectures that he gave. Quotes, Ahriman has the greatest possible interest in instructing men in mathematics, but not in instructing them that mathematical mechanistic concepts of the universe are merely illusions. He is intensely interested in teaching us the concepts of chemistry, physics, biology, and so on, as they are presented today in all their remarkable effects, and in making us believe that that these are absolute truths, not that they are only points of view, like photographs taken from one side. If you photograph a tree from one side, it can be a correct photograph, yet it does not give a picture of the whole tree. Again, this is why he didn't want to teach arithmetics, because he didn't like this idea of breaking down the product, or by viewing the whole as a sum of its parts. He thought the holistic approach was better. And he stated, if you photograph a tree from one side, it can be a true likeness, yet it does not give a picture of the whole tree as can be gained from photographing it from four sides. Ahriman has the greatest interest in concealing from mankind that in modern intellectual rationalistic science, in superstitious empiricism, one is dealing with a great illusion, a deception, that men should not recognize this as of the greatest possible interest to Ahriman. Ahriman's another term for this, this god of time, this lord of wisdom. It
Can
would
we
be a triumph.
equate? Sorry to interrupt you. Can we equate Ahriman somehow with Saturn?
Oh, absolutely. Ahriman, Zervan, Yaldabaoth, Kronos, which is very similar to Choronzom, and I'll get into that. That's one that I think Crowley brought up. It was either Crowley or John Dee. No, John Dee mentioned it, actually. It was John Dee, but Crowley expanded upon it. And I'll get into that, and it links with this idea of algorithm. I'll try and be quick about this, guys. Sorry, probably ranting here.
No.
It would be a triumphant experience for him if the scientific superstition, which infiltrates all areas of life today, and which human beings even try to use as a template for the social sciences, should prevail into the third millennium. What he's meaning is all of society, the social sciences, is being literally built upon the premise of efficiency, the angularization of all things. you're taking things that really are unquantifiable and you're attempting to quantify them. In the process, there's a latent loss through it all, a latent and patent loss of that of the literal magic of that thing, of the essence of it. So, for example, this idea of attempting to angularize or to scientifically inquire into the concept of or to scientifically reduce what God is, or the first principle, or the prima causa, or even the spirit of man. So to understand man as just a mere mechanistic animal, rather than something of a deeper, more profound nature. Um, so he would have the greatest success if he could then arrive in Western civilization in human form and find the scientific superstition as a prevailing dogma. What he means by that is that idea of human form. He means as robots, or as literally taking over people's minds vis-a-vis controlling how they think, what they think, and their avenues for the acquisition of information. That, of course, is through the scrying mirror, which, by the way, was how typically this archetype, this Saturnian archetype, was um, communicated with. So, for example, you had the Nahuatl or Nahuatl, the Aztec faith, that believed, their priests believed that they communicated with Tezcatlipoca, the Lord of the Black Mirror, or the Lord of the Smoking Mirror. Very similar to this concept of the jinn, the beings of smokeless fire, or he was also called Yaotl, the enemy, vis-a-vis these scrying mirrors. John Dee took that concept as well and attempted his angelic conversations. One of the entities or principalities he got in contact with was known as Koronzom. Now, in the Enochian language, Kor means to count or to measure. So Kor is very similar to Chronos. Chronos is literally time. So it makes you wonder where Chronos came from, and of course, assuming that the Enochian language, which it appears to be not of natural origin, because it seems a natural syntax, a natural grammar development, all of this. Its lexicon seems naturally developed as well. Perhaps that's where it derived from. That in this precursor civilization, again, we're speculating here, they perhaps were tapping into something that's immaterial, that's part of the unconscious or beyond material understanding. But it's interesting because that Koronzom, sometimes referred to as the dweller of the abyss, Kor in that literally means to count or to measure. Again, to provide a straight line, to angularize, to make crooked the circle, to turn it into a box or a square, right? So another thing to mention in terms of the algorithm, so the algorithm itself, I did a breakdown of this, and you were talking about, Zeal, this notion that Saturn is linked to the black, right? It's linked to darkness and blackness. Well, again, it links with the black sun, the black star, the Mulge, as the Sumerians called it. It was also known as the Star of the Amorites, by the way, so you've got an Amorite connection here as well. So algorithms etymology and its relation to alchemy or alchemia, alchemia literally meaning of the black or of the black soil or land, which is, of course, the ancient Egyptian
Egypt,
name for Egypt, Kemet, composed of the article of al, the, and Khwarazm, or Khwarazm. Khwarazm itself etymologically derives from the Old Persian Huvarazmi-ish, and this is a composite of words of Huvara, dark, and Jme, land. Thus, again, like alchemy, algorithm means of the black land or of the darkness, of the unconscious, or to thus make the unconscious manifest, or to make the darkness visible through programmatic code and AI, to literally repress the unconscious potential into a contained energetic manifestation. It's like damming up the the river, if you will. That's what
Yeah.
Saturn is in this sense. And to permit the Lord of the Kenoma, or literally the Greek for abyss or empty place, where Yaldabaoth was exiled to in the Gnostic idea, to interface directly into the world by the digital projection of this egregore. Therefore, both alchemy and algorithm etymologically relates to this concept of darkness, of a supposed enigmatic, black or dark land, and perhaps this notion of the primordial chaos of the unconscious. This relates to the appellations of the demiurge, the lord of all things as he was known, with Karonzom, the dweller of the abyss, and Yaldabaoth, meaning child of chaos from its Hebraic root. Another thing to mention as well is that Al-Ghul, or Al-Ghul, where we get our term ghoul from, is of an Arabic derivation, like algorithm, and it means demon. Literally means
Yeah.
demon. It's another name for a jinn. Again, a being of smokeless fire, a being beyond the comprehension of man, of the unconscious abyss. And it's almost like the demiurge is the first of the psychological warfare operatives. He dwells within the unconscious abyss, beyond beyond the knowledge of his targets, and he modulates, he quantizes, he regulates and manipulates their perception through the forms that he brings forth from the void. It's like the potter with the clay that sits around him. He's got an infinite supply of potential iterative forms that he could create from that clay. It's the same thing with the psychological warfare king of this sort of archetype or entity, or this character of Saturn, Kronos, the demiurge,
Mm.
whatever we want to call it. And another thing to mention as well, the stock epithet of Anglometes for Saturn is usually interpreted as meaning plotting, crooked, devious things, but side by side, it is also explained rather as sensibly deliberating on crooked matters. The opposition between the bloody and bloodless sacrifices also leads to contradictions. Athenaeus' report of the Alexandrians sacrificing loaves of bread to Kronos in the Chronia festival violently clashes with Macrobius's information that it was the Alexandrians in particular who made bloody sacrifices to their Kronos. They knew it as Serapis, um, um, literally Osiris Apis, or Osiris of the Appian bull, in a typically Greek manner. Comparable to this is the fact that in the Athenian inscription mentioned above, the bloodless sacrifice of a round cake of Kronos is immediately followed by a sacrifice of a piece of pastry in the shape of an ox, bloodless but referring to bloody matters. So it's this idea you would always have the round cake, the round loaf, even the ox. Why the ox? Because the ox, like the refresh rate of a TV, tills the field. Then he goes back and breaks up all of the harvested corn and literally wipes the simulation clean, to use modern terminology. So it's this idea of time, it's this idea of cycles, it's this idea of what are those things? You remember those old toys where you would draw something and then you would shake it up and it would disappear?
Yeah.
It's the
Scratch,
same.
Oh,
sketch and scratch, or something it was called.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's exactly that. That's Saturn.
Yeah,
The Dweller of
yeah,
the Abyss
yeah.
is literally sitting there in his sedentary position in the abyss, and he's painting things on the black mirror. He creates a scene, then he gets bored with it and just shakes it up, because once you've filled the paper, once you've filled the canvas, the only thing to do to recreate something new is to shake it up. It's to literally get rid of it. So it's these same ideas that constantly reiterate through all of these through
Yeah.
everything. Everything.
It reminds me, there was a Native American. He was a guy that carved masks out of wood, and they were based on Native American gods and goddess and kind of mythological characters that were in the woods and in the rivers and whatnot. But he used to burn them at certain points. Like he'd come out with these amazing masks. Like he's passed away now, but they're in museums. I think he was Canadian. But at a certain point in time, as part of a ritual, they'd burn some of these masks, literally just throw them into a fire. And it just reminds me that what you've just mentioned, this idea of burning, destroying the creation. So it's like an energetic, a meeting of destructive, yeah, exactly, destructive and creative energies in one act, almost like trumping or triumphing over, the limits of creation and destruction.
Well, there you go, trumping. And with the
Yeah,
golden age, right?
The golden age is.
And what was the first thing he stated? Operation Stargate. Has anyone seen that? Where he's
No.
putting 500 billion, I believe, into
yeah, I heard
AI.
something about this. Yeah,
Yeah. So it's he is. This is Saturnian. It's totally Saturn. Whether it's being done knowingly or unknowingly, what was written by, for example, Carol Young and all of these other individuals, what I even wrote of within my various books as well, like Yahweh is Satan, or in the Aleph Tav Eclipse section, or within Leave the World Behind an Esoteric Analysis. It's coming to fruition. It's happening. And even the terminology that they're using constantly reiterates that, It reiterates that.
Well, it's like that thing. I said I used the word Trump, kind of an unwitting, but like in a chaos magic way, it relates directly into what we're talking about through Donald Trump and the use of his language with this. So it's like when you get into that realm of energy, stuff actually starts to appear, even though you didn't mean it to appear, but it starts to take on sort of a life of its own. It's like this the kind of Freudian slip sort of manifestation of a new reality. It kind of, you're in that realm of energy, so stuff starts to appear, and it's like you get weird like coincidences and weird synchronicities, and it's like, Jesus, that's very odd. Like that just happened right now. Or items like that, similar to that. But it's I think, you see, when you're in that type of energy, you get into that resonance. Like you said earlier on in the call, Silas, that the power structure trying to use these preemptive, ritualized operations or psyops or whatever to preempt where the cycle is, where, for example, the constellation cycle, or the energy of the age or whatever, or in dates and times, they're trying to preempt it and harmonize with it to manifest things. Like, so when you're in that type of field, or that magnetic resonant field, stuff happens, and it can be startling. I think, like, you begin to see actual magic happening, like, actual things happening, and I think that's the kind of stuff I think they're messing with, like,
Mhm.
the Hadron Collider perhaps
Yeah.
is some sort of a massive ritual. It's like it was not so long ago up in Loch Ness, and it was near Boleskine House, where Crowley did his one of his final rituals, supposedly. But perhaps what's going on in what do they call it, where the Hadron Collider, where that big project is around Paris.
Well, no, sorry, it's down in Geneva. Geneva's
Geneva,
where
is
it's
it?
going.
What's it
Yeah.
called again?
Oh God, I'll look it up
My
actually.
head is gone. Perhaps they're scientific. They're billed as science, but they're actually ritual. Like, I mean, the line is no longer that
Oh,
clear anymore,
totally. You
Oh,
see
because
it
you're
right
into,
at the front with the Shiva, the statue of
yeah,
Shiva. It's the
yeah,
same idea as the mask.
yeah.
And I saw that, by the way, me and Armin, when I was over in Lisbon, that area. We went to the Convento de Cristo in Tomar, Portugal, and basically in this Templar, yeah, I think it was a Templar priory. you had, it was all Kabbalistic. I mean, the entire, all of the architecture, but there was a lot of instances where, um, sort of, the masonry, the symbolism in the masonry, you had the man, removing his mask. I mean,
Yeah.
the idea of the mask as well, which was sometimes linked with Saturn, Kronos. Of course, in contemporary culture, it's linked with Loki, within Norse
Yeah.
mythology. You saw that in the God of War series, the reboots, and you saw that, of course, in the Mask series. But um, funnily enough, it seems to imply this idea of inevitable change, of
Yeah. Yeah.
transmutation. You know,
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
no one is in the material world. No one is really as they seem, because they are not
Yeah.
being their authentic self. What we artificiate here is merely artificial
Mm.
constructs that we try
Mm.
to abide within. Again, because like what we were talking about, they take the chaos and then they repress the chaos and they turn that into some form of order. But because order itself is not necessarily a primordial constant, it's
Yeah.
artificially induced. It can only
Yeah.
exist for a temporal lot of time.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So this is this idea of the mask. This is this idea that you brought up with,
Mm.
almost, where you we're tapping into something. Even these discussions, none of
Yes.
this is scripted. That we're tapping into just the unconscious.
Mm.
We're,
Yeah.
so we're acting as demiurges ourselves, the
Mm.
craftsmen of reality. And you know, ul- ultimately, the only way we're going to overcome this as a species is to understand really what's going on here. And there seems to be a concerted effort, through basically materialistic and reductionist philosophies like modern scientism, to stop us, to impede us, to uh, destroy or eradicate any potential for us to understand, to marry the creative and the artistic with the scientific,
Hmm. That's right.
Mm.
which is where that is where knowledge really lies. You can't become a robot of science. You can't become a cold binary husk
No.
Yeah.
of the rational and the empirical, because as Steiner rightly states, you become just a shadow of the religiously superstitious, right? You become a literal reiteration of it. It's the same thing with the auto hoax. You
Mhm.
attempt to, go overcorrect into the auto hoax camp. You don't become the contrast of the auto believer. You literally just become the
On
auto
par.
disbeliever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just become he who, um, like the auto believer, is seeking out evidence to confirm his bias of the hoax.
Mm.
So it's the problem with everything. It's the problem with humanity. They overcorrect. They see
Oversimplification.
exactly. They see what the other side are doing, and well, how are we going to simplistically resist that? Well, we'll become the absolute opposite of that. It's the same with Crowley. You know, Crowley, what he sought to do, and the reason Crowley is an absolute moron, um, and really a charlatan as well, is because he saw what the religious found shocking, and he just leaned into it. So he didn't become, as he likes to state with his five V's, uh, unus, I forget the Latin, or the sort of broken Latin, but it means, I, by the power of truth, have conquered the world as a man while I was still alive. Right? It's a
Wow.
prideful proclamation that makes no sense, because ultimately what Thelema and Crowley were seeking to do, and Ordo Templi Orientis and all of this, the Golden Dawn as well, is just literally become the antithesis to the religion, right? And in becoming the antithesis of it, they they literally just became an offshoot of it. They were merely of the same tree, the
Yeah.
same branch, the same root system of it.
Mm-hmm. Equally dogmatic, shuts down all
Exactly.
further lines of inquiry.
Yeah. And that's the problem with scientism as well.
Mhm.
Trust the science. Take that leap of faith, brother. Right? Die and be resurrected in the light of the glorious Savior. You know? I remember I did that video, the cult of COVID, right? I'll probably put this up on YouTube, this discussion. So if we're talking about this, just use Needlecraft and CV or whatever.
Jibby jam.
Yeah. So I remember in that cult of the cult of Kuth, that really old video. I showed it. You even had this. Remember the circles, the 2 meters distance, and that. And
Mhm.
again, it's very
Oh, yeah.
magical thinking, superstitious thinking. It's basically a salt circle. You had for the 12 o'clock
Oh, man.
salute, of the gun in Edinburgh Castle. Well, when people were permitted back and they were taking admissions, you all had to stand in these 2 meter apart circles that were drawn on the ground with white spray paint, and
Yeah.
basically a salt circle,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
this
yeah,
this is
yeah.
what scientism was producing, because it's superstition.
yeah,
It's
yeah,
because
yeah,
all societies, because ultimately they want to keep it as simplistic as possible to ensure the uptake of their marketing. They basically just reiteratively, um, eh, repurpose and reuse old superstitious structural dogmas, right?
yeah.
There's nothing new under the sun. And that's the problem. No one really. You've got to look at this in a very deep and critical manner, and you can leave no prisoners, because even yourself, myself included, I have some seriously deep-seated biases, as does everyone, and we
course.
have
Mhm.
deep-seated superstitions. And again, we can't get away from that. We're always going to have assumptions
No.
and beliefs, but it's about understanding them.
Understanding, accounting for it where you can.
Yeah,
Right.
and understanding where they come from, right?
Yeah.
And like what you're saying, Zeal, we're tapping into things here,
Yeah.
almost instinctively and subconsciously, and we have to ask ourselves why. What is to that? You know, is there something deeper to all of that? Is there something? Is there a deeper entelechy to that process? Is there a deeper mechanism that's attempting to bring that potential that's perhaps hard coded into
Well,
reality, into fruition?
Yeah, that's a good
there is
question.
that. Are we instruments of the divine, or otherwise?
Well, it's like what I think you stated it a few years ago in a really good discussion we had, where you said they acknowledge, you said they acknowledge God in their transgressions.
Yeah,
So it's this idea,
yeah,
they
exactly.
acknowledge the prima causa, where all of this comes from, in their perception management. If we had no power, why would they try and manage us and manage our
Mhm.
perception?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, 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 yeah.
It's because they know the power comes from the conduit of perception.
But
Um,
it's like you said there a few minutes ago, like this, you know, this the concept of the science and the creative artistic, that they must be divided and kind of kept apart. And I think that's a kind of a deeper objective of the power structure, that at all costs humanity must not be allowed to understand the marriage of these principles,
Mhm.
what it might mean. This artistic, they have to, we have to be kept in the dark about this at all costs. We have to be ushered into a new reality, born into this new world where those concepts are completely mutually exclusive and they can't exist in the same
Exactly.
realm, because it's far too dangerous
Hence, great
for the
Gen
power
Alpha.
structure. Come again?
Well, Gen Alpha, right? Why else are they using the
Yeah.
term alpha? It's a little frightening.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Gentlemen, on that note, I'm going to have to hit the hay here, but it was a great chat, and I wish you well. We'll hopefully continue at some point in time again. There's
Absolutely,
maybe
man.
more to discuss.
Absolutely. Right back at
Yeah.
you. And thanks for bearing with me. I've been a little bit scatterbrained talking today. So, yeah, hopefully the next one I'll
But you know
do
what?
better.
Sometimes I think that's a great way to be, because sometimes I kind of, again, back to the same idea. Some of the best stuff comes from an initially scattered chat, and
Right.
then stuff starts to manifest and appear out of those. Do you know what I mean? And then
Yeah.
it suddenly a roadway opens, and you're like, "Fuck! What? This is
Yep.
really interesting stuff." And it's like it wouldn't have happened only for an initial fumbling around. Do you
That's
know? But
right. Embrace the
all the
chaos.
creative processes are like that. I think someone who writes a song, for example, like I put up Gustav Holst's "The Planets," written in the early part of the 20th century, I think. And he wrote a kind of a concerto or classical music piece based around each planet.
Mm.
And I posted Saturn there, the one he did on Saturn. But he went, as far as I know, he went to great lengths to try to, like, certain dates that the piece was written on, and certain cadences, musical cadences, align with or harmonize with or reverberate around planetary principles, mathematical principle, kind of, so. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is that some of the greatest piece of music, initially someone sits down, for example, behind the piano, and they just might hit a chord and then another chord, and they're fumbling around for a while. It's, there's an initial searching, or it's like that scrying, that concept of scrying. When you sit down with the mirror first, like the image doesn't, or the thing doesn't automatically appear. There's a time of a development kind of thing. And similarly with the creative process, it doesn't automatically. You have to kind of engage slowly with the thing for it to start maybe to take a form or begin to manifest. So
Yeah, you're
I
spot
think
on.
yeah.
Actually, quoted you not too long ago when you were talking about some of the best drum rhythms that you've ever created have been where you just start with no idea where you're going and it's where you
Yeah,
find yourself.
but I was kind of shocked. Not saying I'm a great drummer, but I was shocked that because you give yourself the pareidolia moment. You create the cloud. It's like, well, what am I going to do? I don't know what I'm going to do. So okay, let me create an initial thing to scry or to stare into,
Right.
and
It's
I'll
like
pick
the
forms out
scratch
of that.
pad. Yeah.
Yeah, but you'd have to kind of start with a line. To start with the line. Let the pencil and the line initially move in a given direction, and it's kind of so
So thank you for
babbling
making me feel
perhaps.
better about being scatterbrained.
No, but I'm the same. I'm total scatterbrain. Like it's but it's you're chanting and that's like the shamanic thing. Maybe at the start of their rituals, they don't fully know what the hell they're saying. They're just babbling. There's going off on one, and it's after a period of some minutes chanting, and maybe something appears, and then it has a resonant effect. Like other people hear it, and oh, right, that kind of something
It's the
appears out of it.
same
Then
way to when I rarely do this, but there was a few songs that I wrote, and it started off where I was on the construction site, and I was just like humming
yeah,
a
Oh,
certain
nice.
it might
Like
have been a
melody.
hook or a melody. I usually starts with the chorus. It'll be some hook, and I'll use that as the basis, like we were saying, and to build on. And you just sit there, and more things develop and come to you if it's a good idea. And it just happens naturally where eventually you'll create an entire song just out of this, or create lyrics just out of this. There was a song that I put up called "Ancient of Days." It's sort of
mm.
lyrics and that with it, and I mean that. Pardon me. That was that process, you know. So it's absolutely
But
like
the,
that.
even on that's very interesting, and it was the way I recorded some of the stuff where I started at the end. I started with an improvised drum track, just jammed out the drum track, and then wrote the song on top of that. But it's like you were saying, Silas. There, you started with the chorus, but like by the time, so you created backwards, and I
Yeah.
created backwards. But the listener or the viewer doesn't hear backwards. They start with hear you when they listen to the song. They hear the verse first.
Yeah.
So the sleight of hand, the sorcery, they'll never know that you started with the
Well,
chorus.
it's like the retrograde motions of the astronomical ages. You do it
Mm.
backwards as opposed to it's the same
But
idea. Yeah.
that is the sorcery. But the perception,
Hmm.
who perceives sees it moving forward in a certain
Yeah.
way, but they never see the creative aspect, which was done backwards. Similarly,
Well,
with somebody who write a novel, there's multiple rewrites. There was chapters that were thrown out, scrapped, paragraphs added, lines changed, characters names, rewrites, went to the
Oh
editorial
yeah.
team, threw it out, red line, got rid of
yeah.
that whole fucking chapter's not working there. You need to cut like 2,000 words out of the fucking thing. It's shit, the end of the shit, rewrite it, blah, blah, blah. But by the time you sit down and read the book, the reader never, they're under the spell, like,
Exactly. Well,
that
that's
creative.
that's because it's the effects based construction.
Yeah,
Meaning, it's when you're writing it, you're already looking at the conclusion. How is
yeah,
it going to affect them? So then
exactly.
you write it from the ending, basically backwards. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
they never see it like that. Pardon me. Yeah,
No, why else would you? I mean, I think the natural inclination would be what you're hearing is the initial spontaneous production of whoever was recording this. But
yeah.
But like if you
doing it.
truly engage as a listener or a reader, it's the same way that the person in society is engaging as an active participant in society. You're you're opening yourself to that experience.
Exactly.
Like when you sit down and watch a movie or something, you're putting stuff out of your head, you're allowing it in. You're allowing that novel to come in, you're allowing those characters to come to life. You're allowing the emotion in that song to enter your soul and to sort of empathize with that and feel that,
Hmm.
like, so you're participating. There's a whole thing there where you talk about demonic possession. It's like a similar
Melodic
type of
possession.
mechanism. Melodic possession, or possession of dance, or whatever, or
The
narrative.
dancing plague.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but similarly, the society is allowing themselves to participate in that narrative because it makes sense. It's
feels
it,
good. Feels good as
yeah,
well.
but it presents as a rational narrative in
Hmm.
the absence of anything else. It presents there's a big orange guy there in a suit who's now back in power, and that makes sense because there's a lot of bad guys, and he's a bit weird, and I kind of like him, and it makes sense. And without him, what else is there? If he wasn't there, what would there be?
No winning.
There'd be no
But you,
nothing. There'd just be an absence.
well, you have the
So
Orange Man in the Golden Age, and then you had
yeah,
Biden. This sort of silvery haired,
Husk.
husk,
husk. Yeah,
very very draconic and lunar figure. This old figure, this figure without life. Now, I mean, it's all of it's again, it's a sequence of
I see. Going back to
possession.
Holt there, and I meant to ask you, I must head off to bed, but
Yeah,
one of his I think he referred to Saturn, as you're on about Biden there, he referred to Saturn as the bringer of old age.
Oh yeah.
yeah, yeah,
But
Not
I don't
terribly
know what
old.
does that make sense to you, Silas, why it's called that, or
yeah.
have you heard
There's
that before?
actually so again this links to this notion that where is that? Yeah, he's the bringer of old age. He's the father of time. He's again like what we were stating, because everything's chaos. That which is order can only exist for a temporal time. It will always have to drift back to the unconscious, to the underworld, where everything dwells from. So Saturn is this bringer. He permits the cycles. He controls the cycles, if you will. And there's this discussion where you see, very quickly, just before you jump off, Theocritus in his Eclogue, lines 5 to 8, and he's talking about the life at the time of Kronos, or the time of Saturn, linking to the fall of man. And by the way, this is where the Daemones comes from. Literally, Saturn was the lord of the Daemones. The Daemones, where demons come from, and the Greek daemones, meaning spirit. The Daemones is literally the knowing or the wise ones. So you have this idea of Lucifer and the rational and all of this, but it states, "Now the last age by Cumes Sibyl sung has come and gone, and the majestic roll of circling centuries begins anew. Astrea returns old Saturn's reign, with a new breed of men sent down from heaven."
Oh,
So it's this same notion, right? Of oblivion. It's known as oblivion, or what you see in, for example, Plato's The Republic, right at the end, where I think it's the mythos of Ur or Ur, where this warrior or Ur, I forget his name now. He goes to the under. They believe he's dead, and they get ready to burn him on the pyre, and he's in the underworld, the unconscious realms, death, and he doesn't. He goes to drink from the river of forgetfulness, which is sort of like that idea. You draw something on the scratcher pad or whatever, then shake it up, and they say to him, the ferryman says, Saturn, perhaps, says, "It's not your time yet. Go back." So then he returns, and the story is he awakens on the pyre just before his fellow warriors and comrades are about to set ablaze this funeral pyre. He states, "No, I'm actually alive," and he recounts the story of the river Lethe, literally the river of untruthfulness, the river of lies, the river of forgetfulness, and discusses how reincarnation works, how all of this material existence works, and things like that. Again, that's all tied in with this thing you're reading here from Theocritus. So yeah,
Lethe is Greek, isn't it?
yeah, yeah. The negative the negative would be aletheia, which I think means truth. So it's literally the negation of forgetfulness, which is either truth or, that idea. But it's this notion that we're in amnesia, that we do things rather involuntarily or autonomously, like a dreamer would, like a slumbering dreamer, like the headless Orion. It's all of these concepts tied in together, but that all links up with Saturn, the Age of Aquarius, the
Or
digitization
a
of man.
swimmer. As a swimmer, I remember someone was. It just came into my head. Somebody was talking about Ronald Reagan, and they were trying to give an insight. I think it was his biographer, or his author, or whatever. But he was trying to give an insight into Reagan's mind, and the angle he took on it was Reagan was a swimmer. He was into swimming, so he understood things as a swimmer would, how things move past him slowly and kind of in a blurred, kind of slow motion fashion. And was his approach through life, as it were. Like, but it just triggered whatever Silas was saying there. That just popped into my head. This concept of the Aquarius about seeing things in this manner as a swimmer would, as the fish-eyed. Where did I come across
So
that?
me being a non-swimmer, I guess what is that perspective? Just, or I mean, don't let me keep you, of course. I just
It's sort of a gradual perception of all things,
Yeah,
isn't it?
it's kind of almost like, well, like certain things you do give you an almost sort of an altered state of perception. Like recently, I bought a motorbike, and when I'm on the motorcycle, it changes how I kind of see things and experience things. It's like when I'm on the bicycle. Today, I was on the bicycle, and that gives me a different feeling, and it changes how I perceive things. It affects how you
yeah,
see things.
that's an
It's
interesting
like
one because Yeah.
or
Okay.
if I'm not sure. It's like a totenistic, to use that Spinal Tap word. It's kind of like a magical.
Talisman.
Yeah,
Talismanic.
that changes how you, or the drum maybe in a completely different way. If the shamanic thing, when you the beat of the drum changes the perceptive, how you perceive, like, you know. There was a guy when I was down the site the other day. Some guy was beating on an oil drum, just bored, standing around the building site, and he was keeping a rhythm going on an oil drum just with his bare hands, just out of sheer boredom. But I was in some corner of the site, and whatever way I could hear the rhythm, it changed the vibe on the site for that split second. I was like, that's kind of cool. Like, that sounds like something's happening, or something's about to happen, or you know what I mean?
Mhm.
It's like it hit you before you twigged in what's that Muppet doing. When it hit you first deeper, you were like, it kind of gave you a sense of something. So these different things kind of change how you perceive things, kind of at a very subtle level. But it's like, you know, if you're tuned into it, you can kind of feel that change. But normally you
Uh,
don't feel that change because it's much too subtle.
Then the instinctive reaction was to set a bonfire up and start dancing around it.
Exactly, yeah. Or a celebration or something. Like, it was
Yeah.
like something was kicking
Yeah.
off. You had this feeling of something was going on, you know, because it was like
Yeah.
it hit you in a drum. The drum in the public space does that because it's probably something ancient is in your DNA. Is
Mhm.
like, all right, I
It's
remember
definitely
that
going
from,
beyond adrenaline.
yeah. That reminds me of something that happened 12,000 years ago, you know, when I was in a different form in a different space and time, you know. And
Yeah.
anyway, dudes, I gotta go on.
It's always a
Yeah,
Drift
pleasure.
man.
off into the other world.
Till
Take it easy, man.
the next
Good
one.
night. Thanks
Yeah.
for giving me some insight into Saturn, Silas, because I feel a bit stupid. Like, as much as I've heard about the occult, if somebody asked me in the morning, why is Saturn, I would not be able to answer it. After years and years, I still can't fucking get my head around what is the deal with it. But thanks for bringing a bit of insight
That's
there.
right, man.
The next
Man.
All
dudes.
right. Yeah.
Right,
Okay,
dude.
guys.
Take it easy.
Take care and good night. Take care and
Right.
good
See
chatting.
ya.
Take care. Good night. Good
Thanks,
night. Good
man.
night.
Bye. Bye.